Welcome to Shredder Fanfic. Like, subscribe, and hype video. Join members to gain early access to new videos. The main character, after a very unfortunate accident, he dies in his previous life. He gets reborn into Naruto, which is one of the big three. Inside of Naruto, he decides to deceive the entire ninja world.
Ninja world, an unhealed scar of war, and a breeding ground for ideals to be twisted in despair. Here, the continuous rain is like the silent weeping of this country, a collection of tears from countless lost lives. It washes away the bloodstains, but it cannot wash away the hatred. Ideal. Hanzo recalled the young man named Yahiko and thought of the ideals and peace that Yahiko had mentioned. Did that young Hanzo not have ideals? Did he not yearn for peace? In my youthful arrogance, I always thought that there was nothing I wouldn't do. As time goes by, I finally realize that everyone's strength has its limits. He is now the leader of Aimgakure, a hero of the land of rain, and carries the lives of thousands upon thousands of people on his shoulders. He cannot gamble, dares not gamble, and cannot win the gamble. With this in mind, Hanzo's cloudy eyes gradually hardened. Knock, knock. Just then, there was a knock on the door. Come in. Hanzo's thoughts were interrupted, and he said calmly. A Rain Village ninja rushed in, shouting, No, something terrible has happened, Lord Hanzo. Shut up, Hanzo's voice turned cold. What's all the panicking about? I'm not dead yet. The sky isn't falling. Yes, yes. The Rain Village ninja pursed his dry lips, calmed down, and reported to his superior, Lord Hanzo, the people from Konoha have arrived. They want to see you. Konoha, Hanzo frowned immediately, a sense of unease rising in his heart. They've arrived so quickly. If you haven't seen the movie version, you don't need to watch it. The plot isn't great. I'm just using the setting as a starting point and won't write a detailed plot summary for the movie. It doesn't matter if you haven't seen it, so there's no need to torture yourself. End of this chapter. Chapter 60, 4 weak points and fatal flaws. Chapter 60, 4 weak points and fatal flaws. The room fell into a deathly silence, and the atmosphere gradually became oppressive. Having received no reply from Hanzo for a long time, the Aimgakure ninja knelt on one knee behind the screen, beads of sweat appearing on his forehead. Shenda. Hanzo's voice, so calm it was almost eerie, reached his ears. The Rain Village ninja called Shinta subconsciously looked up and saw the figure that had been behind the screen walk out. Upon seeing that calm and indifferent familiar face, Jinta, as Hanzo's right hand, suddenly felt that the old man in front of him was somewhat unfamiliar. Even if his figure remains upright, the weariness in his bones is impossible to conceal. Lord Hanzo, have you really aged so much? Take 3 squads from the Anbu and come with me to meet the people of Konoha. Let's see what they're up to this time. Hanzo's voice was cold and calm, the hardness in his words like hammering a nail into a wall. Yes, Lord Hanzo. Shen Da, who had been lost in thought, suddenly snapped out of it, lowered his head and answered, pursing his dry lips. At this moment, he was both surprised and delighted. He was surprised by Hanzo's old age and delighted by Hanzo's toughness. Lord Hanzo is still the same Lord Hanzo, still a hero of Aimgakure. Ramble. As Hanzo led his men out of the tower, a bolt of lightning illuminated the desolate world, coinciding with a thunderclap in the sky. The grey sky seemed to have cracked open with a blue gap, from which dense raindrops poured down, intertwining before Hanzo's eyes like the veins of leaves. He hasn't made a move in far too long, and hasn't even stepped out of the tower in far too long. Fear forced him to hide atop the tower, and he was even more unwilling to let anyone see his aging appearance. However, since the people from Konoha dared to come to our door, it means they must have already gathered a lot of intelligence. Therefore, at this moment, he could no longer afford to be timid or hesitant. The people of Konoha were following protocol in requesting an audience with him, and he had no reason to refuse their request. If we back down now, if we show weakness, we will be ruined. For Hanzo now, this is more terrifying than death, because he doesn't have much left now. A moment later, Hanzo walked into the watchtower in front of Aimgakure's gate. The moment he stepped into the tower, the heavy rain that was pressing down on his shoulders was cut off. He finally saw who the people Konoha had sent to see him were. Lord Hanzo. Kakashi Hatake bowed slightly, his attitude impeccably humble and polite, and said, "We are deeply honored that you have agreed to this meeting. Please allow me to convey my regards to you on behalf of the third Hokage. This is to tell Hanzo that this meeting is public and proper, with Hiruzen Sarutobai's permission." However, even though he was very humble, the Aimgakure ninjas following behind Hanzo still looked at them with hostility and even hatred. Most of Hanzo's men harbored deep-seated hatred for these powerful nations that had brought disaster and suffering to their country, so they naturally wouldn't have any friendly attitude towards Kakashi Hatake and his group. Hanzo looked at the young Konoha prodigy in front of him and felt saddened once again by the gap between Aimgakure and Konoha. His gaze then swept over the dozen or so Konoha ninjas behind him. A team of more than a dozen people entered the capital of the Land of Rain and even stayed for several days to gather intelligence, thoroughly investigating the information about Aimgakure. His Aimgakure village was completely unaware of this. Thinking of this, Hanzo's suspicious and insecure nature kicked in again, and he said in a slightly cold tone, "Enough with the nonsense, I'm here. What do you want?" Kakashi Hatake ignored Hanzo's condescending attitude, took out a scroll from his pocket, and handed it to Hanzo with both hands. Shinta, who was behind Hanzo, stepped forward to take the scroll in Hanzo's place, but Hanzo raised his hand to stop him. Even if you have to put on a brave face, you can't show the slightest fear. Hanzo reached out and took the scroll himself, appearing calm and collected on the surface, but actually carefully unrolling it. If this scroll had been sent by Danzo Shimura, he would never have been so at ease, given that he had worked with Danzo and knew him very well. However, Hiruzen Sarutobai was not Danzo Shimura after all, and would not resort to underhanded tactics in such a place, so it was just a letter with sincere words. Hanzo's gaze swept over the contents, and his eyes narrowed slightly. Kakashi Hatake and the other Konoha members observed his expression and reaction. They received a reply from the third-generation official on the third day after sending the message. As they had expected, Hiruzen Sarutobai did not refuse and allowed them to proceed. The only thing is that Hiruzen Sarutobai's attitude is ambiguous, and even Kakashi thinks it has a deeper meaning. That is the condition for the alliance. Konoha will help Hanzo eliminate the remnants of Akatsuki. The shrewd and experienced Hiruzen Sarutobai saw further than the young Kakashi, knowing that a troublesome neighbor is a good, obedient neighbor. If they really help Hanzo get rid of the Akatsuki trouble, then it will be Konoha's turn to become the trouble. Even if they were to form an alliance with Hanzo and Aimgakure, they would still need to keep the Akatsuki organization in check to restrain Hanzo. As long as the threat from Akatsuki remains, Hanzo will not direct his attacks outwards. Kakashi understood Hiruzen Sarutobai's meaning, and had to admit that the third Hokage was indeed more thoughtful than he had imagined. But would Hanzo agree so easily? A letter of intent to conclude an alliance. Hanzo raised his eyes, looking at the Konoha members before him, his gaze slightly cold as he said, "They're already struggling to survive, yet they're still playing dirty tricks. Konoha really hasn't learned its lesson." Upon hearing this, the atmosphere inside the tower suddenly became heavy, tense, and oppressive. Most of the Rain Village ninja present quickly realized what Konoha's purpose was in coming here. To form an alliance. Heh, they clearly want these Rain Village ninjas to be cannon fodder for Konoha. With this in mind, the Aimgakure members gripped their weapons tightly, ready to leap out and hack these damned Konoha ninja to pieces at Hanzo's command. "What makes you say that, Lord Hanzo?" Kakashi Hatake asked, his expression unchanged. "The so-called alliance is nothing but a piece of waste paper in the eyes of your great powers." Hanzo's tone was tinged with coldness. "Once it loses its usefulness, you can tear it up whenever you want. If this so-called alliance were truly effective, the Third Shinobi World War would not have occurred." Therefore, Hanzo did not believe a single word of the covenant mentioned in Hiruzen Sarutobai's letter. "Lord Hanzo, shall I remind you?" Kakashi Hatake looked up at Hanzo in front of him, his tone still gentle, but his words caused the expressions of Hanzo and the others from Aimgakure to change. "Once the land of fire goes to war with the land of wind and the land of earth, the land of rain will inevitably become the best route of attack for Iwagakure and Sunagakure, and I think you know their character all too well." At this point, Kakashi Hatake paused for a moment, then smiled slightly and said, "When that time comes, will you choose to let them pass, allowing those desperate ninjas to burn, kill, and plunder, or will you choose to fight to the death? If you resist, where will you get food, weapons, and other resources to meet your logistical needs?" This is the common Achilles heel, and Achilles heel of Hanzo, Aimgakure, and the Land of Rain. End of this chapter. Chapter 65. Has the once arrogant Hanzo become an old dog? Chapter 65. Has the once arrogant Hanzo become an old dog? Hanzo opened his mouth, but couldn't utter a word. He hadn't expected that Konoha was already so aware of the current situation of the Land of Rain and Aimgakure. Why did he finally lose his temper and declare war on the 5 great nations during the Second Shinobi World War? It should be noted that before the Second Shinobi World War had fully broken out, the disputes between the 5 great nations were still very restrained and limited to localized frictions. At that time, the Land of Rain did not refuse to become a buffer zone for the great nations. However, the faces of Sunagakure and Iwagakure were truly appalling, especially those Sunagakure ninjas who were practically driven mad by poverty. In the Land of Rain, they not only attack ninjas, but also show no regard for civilian casualties during battles. Many Sand Village ninjas even engage in arson, murder, and looting, and the Kazekage turns a blind eye to it. Since Sunagakure's finances were already in a bad state, plundering civilians could actually alleviate the village's financial burden. Anyway, it's not like we're robbing civilians from the Wind Kingdom. The lives of civilians in small countries are the least valuable. Therefore, Hanzo, who was still young at the time, could no longer tolerate it and directly overturned the table, leading Aimgakure to rebel against the 5 great nations. But back then he was really young, really proud, full of ambition and dreams, and full of vigor. He vowed to change the Rain Kingdom and bring peace to it, believing that he could change the world on his own. He felt that he was special, that he and his companions were like the protagonists in a story, and that the protagonists and their companions would never die. But when he was wounded in the war and reached out to touch the bloodied corpses of his comrades, and watched helplessly as more and more people were worn down and starved to death, he understood that no one in this world was special. No one was. Therefore, having come to terms with reality, he spared Jiraiya, Orochimaru, and Tsunade, who were his enemies. Because at that time, the Land of Rain and Aimgakure were almost out of supplies and resources, and simply could not withstand Hiruzen Sarutobai's hysterical anger after losing his disciple. Therefore, having come to terms with reality, he joined forces with Danzo to kill Yahiko, who resembled him in his youth. Because at that time, he believed that everything Yahiko said was nothing but unrealistic fantasy that would only shake his hard-won power and status and push the Land of Rain into an abyss. But now Hanzo is starting to regret it. If that young man were still alive, if that guy named Nagato were still alive, if he hadn't attacked the Akatsuki, if Aimgakure had a successor. The reason why the Land of Rain was able to neither win nor lose in the Second Shinobi World War was simply because of Hanzo's existence. At that time, he was still at the peak of his ninja career, but now he is powerless and old, which means that the Land of Rain has completely lost its last bargaining chip. Now, faced with the shameless plundering of Iwagakure and Sunagakure, unless he and Aimgakure choose not to resist, if they choose to fight back again, they will quickly run out of ammunition and food. Therefore, it seems that their only option now is to cooperate with Konoha. No, to put it nicely, it's cooperation, but in reality, it's dependence. After a long silence, Hanzo turned his gaze to the Aimgakure members behind him, his voice slightly hoarse, and asked, "What are you all thinking?" Upon hearing this, he suddenly felt nauseous. He knew that he was not giving them the opportunity to choose, but rather the responsibility to choose. He is running away from the choices he should have made, and running away from the responsibilities he should have borne. He can't even face himself right now. He became the kind of person he used to despise the most. As he expected, the people of Aimgakure fell silent. They were not unaware of Aimgakure's current predicament. The Land of Rain simply did not have the resources to meet logistical needs and could not support their resistance in the Second Shinobi World War. The foundation and strength of a great power are far beyond what the Land of Rain can compare to. However, even so, they still hoped to see Lord Hanzo act decisively as he had in the past, so that Konoha would understand that Aimgakure was not weak and could not be bullied, and that Hanzo's authority was not something a teenager could challenge. Even if the consequence of making this choice is that they have to sacrifice their lives, they are willing to follow Hanzo. But now Lord Hanzo has compromised. Disappointed. Perhaps, but this is the best option for Aimgakure right now. Do you understand? Perhaps there are exceptions, but relying on a powerful nation with whom they share a deep-seated blood feud, they find it difficult to convince themselves otherwise. Shame, anger, resentment, confusion, helplessness. The breath that had been building up inside him seemed to have been released, and his hand, holding the weapon, felt weak. Seeing this, Kakashi Hatake breathed a sigh of relief, realizing that Hanzo had truly changed, and that there shouldn't be any problems with this negotiation. Just as he was about to say something, pat! A drop of red water fell from the top of the tower, hitting the ground and splashing, breaking the suffocating and oppressive silence. Snap, snap. Standing next to Hanzo, Shinta subconsciously looked up, only to find a few drops of blood landing on his dry lips. The familiar, rusty smell startled him. Click! An extremely abrupt sound rang out, particularly jarring in the desolation, crisp like a silver bottle shattering. The glass dome at the top of the tower shattered, and shards of glass fell from the sky onto the crowd below. It was as if a giant hand had pulled back the curtain, and a noisy wind surged in from above. Immediately, a whistling wind arose from above, and a dark shadow plummeted down at high speed, landing right between Kakashi Hatake and Hanzo. Bang! The Konoha and Aimgakure members instinctively took a few steps back, but crimson blood gushed out, splattering onto their faces and leaving dark red marks. They looked at the deformed figure falling from above with disbelief and astonishment. It was a twisted and deformed corpse, its head twisted several times and only connected to its neck by skin. The face showed visible shock and fear, and horrifying blood flowed on the open ground. Instead of horrifying wounds, the body was twisted, as if torn apart by brute force. Like a towel that has been wrung out forcefully, the flesh and bones twist and spin out, the pale bones piercing through the skin like thorns, a cruelty and pain that is visible to the naked eye. It's you guys. Hanzo subconsciously looked at Kakashi Hatake in front of him, only to find that Kakashi Hatake was giving him the same look. It wasn't him. Someone interfered. Seeing the surprise and doubt in each other's eyes, the two realized this almost simultaneously and immediately looked up. Right in front of the shattered glass dome, a figure stood suspended in midair. The dim moonlight behind him illuminated the surroundings, clearly revealing the terrified and panicked faces of the people below and exposing the filth and depravity within the entire tower. This is truly disappointing. The once arrogant Hanzo has now had his spine broken and turned into an old dog. He looked down at the crowd below, his words full of mockery as he announced his presence. It will be available for purchase next Friday, and there will be a lot of updates. Please vote with your monthly tickets QAQ. End of this chapter. Chapter 66, Weak Points and Fatal Flaws. Chapter 66, Weak Points and Fatal Flaws. The room fell into a deathly silence, and the atmosphere gradually became oppressive. Having received no reply from Hanzo for a long time, the Aimgakure ninja knelt on one knee behind the screen, beads of sweat appearing on his forehead. Shenda. Hanzo's voice, so calm it was almost eerie, reached his ears. The Rain Village ninja called Shinta subconsciously looked up and saw the figure that had been behind the screen walk out. Upon seeing that calm and indifferent familiar face, Jinta, as Hanzo's right hand, suddenly felt that the old man in front of him was somewhat unfamiliar. Even if his figure remains upright, the weariness in his bones is impossible to conceal. Lord Hanzo, have you really aged so much? Take 3 squads from the Anbu and come with me to meet the people of Konoha. Let's see what they're up to this time. Hanzo's voice was cold and calm, the hardness in his words like hammering a nail into a wall. Yes, Lord Hanzo. Shen Da, who had been lost in thought, suddenly snapped out of it, lowered his head and answered, pursing his dry lips. At this moment, he was both surprised and delighted. He was surprised by Hanzo's old age and delighted by Hanzo's toughness. Lord Hanzo is still the same Lord Hanzo, still a hero of Aimgakure. Ramble. As Hanzo led his men out of the tower, a bolt of lightning illuminated the desolate world, coinciding with a thunderclap in the sky. The grey sky seemed to have cracked open with a blue gap, from which dense raindrops poured down, intertwining before Hanzo's eyes like the veins of leaves. He hasn't made a move in far too long, and hasn't even stepped out of the tower in far too long. Fear forced him to hide atop the tower, and he was even more unwilling to let anyone see his aging appearance. However, since the people from Konoha dared to come to our door, it means they must have already gathered a lot of intelligence. Therefore, at this moment, he could no longer afford to be timid or hesitant. The people of Konoha were following protocol in requesting an audience with him, and he had no reason to refuse their request. If we back down now, if we show weakness, we will be ruined. For Hanzo now, this is more terrifying than death, because he doesn't have much left now. A moment later, Hanzo walked into the watchtower in front of Aimgakure's gate. The moment he stepped into the tower, the heavy rain that was pressing down on his shoulders was cut off. He finally saw who the people Konoha had sent to see him were. Lord Hanzo. Kakashi Hatake bowed slightly, his attitude impeccably humble and polite, and said, "We are deeply honored that you have agreed to this meeting. Please allow me to convey my regards to you on behalf of the Third Hokage." This is to tell Hanzo that this meeting is public and proper, with Hiruzen Sarutobai's permission. However, even though he was very humble, the Aimgakure ninjas following behind Hanzo still looked at them with hostility and even hatred. Most of Hanzo's men harbored deep-seated hatred for these powerful nations that had brought disaster and suffering to their country, so they naturally wouldn't have any friendly attitude towards Kakashi Hatake and his group. Hanzo looked at the young Konoha prodigy in front of him and felt saddened once again by the gap between Aimgakure and Konoha. His gaze then swept over the dozen or so Konoha ninjas behind him. A team of more than a dozen people entered the capital of the Land of Rain and even stayed for several days to gather intelligence, thoroughly investigating the information about Aimgakure. His Aimgakure village was completely unaware of this. Thinking of this, Hanzo's suspicious and insecure nature kicked in again, and he said in a slightly cold tone, "Enough with the nonsense, I'm here. What do you want?" Kakashi Hatake ignored Hanzo's condescending attitude, took out a scroll from his pocket, and handed it to Hanzo with both hands. Shinta, who was behind Hanzo, stepped forward to take the scroll in Hanzo's place, but Hanzo raised his hand to stop him. Even if you have to put on a brave face, you can't show the slightest fear. Hanzo reached out and took the scroll himself, appearing calm and collected on the surface, but actually carefully unrolling it. If this scroll had been sent by Danzo Shimura, he would never have been so at ease, given that he had worked with Danzo and knew him very well. However, Hiruzen Sarutobi was not Danzo Shimura after all, and would not resort to underhanded tactics in such a place, so it was just a letter with sincere words. Hanzo's gaze swept over the contents, and his eyes narrowed slightly. Kakashi Hatake and the other Konoha members observed his expression and reaction. They received a reply from the third-generation official on the third day after sending the message. As they had expected, Hiruzen Sarutobi did not refuse and allowed them to proceed. The only thing is that Hiruzen Sarutobi's attitude is ambiguous, and even Kakashi thinks it has a deeper meaning. That is the condition for the alliance. Konoha will help Hanzo eliminate the remnants of Akatsuki. The shrewd and experienced Hiruzen Sarutobi saw further than the young Kakashi, knowing that a troublesome neighbor is a good, obedient neighbor. If they really help Hanzo get rid of the Akatsuki trouble, then it will be Konoha's turn to become the trouble. Even if they were to form an alliance with Hanzo and Aimgakure, they would still need to keep the Akatsuki organization in check to restrain Hanzo. As long as the threat from Akatsuki remains, Hanzo will not direct his attacks outwards. Kakashi understood Hiruzen Sarutobi's meaning, and had to admit that the third Hokage was indeed more thoughtful than he had imagined. But would Hanzo agree so easily? A letter of intent to conclude an alliance. Hanzo raised his eyes, looking at the Konoha members before him, his gaze slightly cold as he said, "They're already struggling to survive, yet they're still playing dirty tricks. Konoha really hasn't learned its lesson." Upon hearing this, the atmosphere inside the tower suddenly became heavy, tense, and oppressive. Most of the Rain Village ninja present quickly realized what Konoha's purpose was in coming here. To form an alliance. Heh, they clearly want these Rain Village ninjas to be cannon fodder for Konoha. With this in mind, the Aimgakure members gripped their weapons tightly, ready to leap out and hack these damned Konoha ninja to pieces at Hanzo's command. "What makes you say that, Lord Hanzo?" Kakashi Hatake asked, his expression unchanged. "The so-called alliance is nothing but a piece of waste paper in the eyes of your great powers." Hanzo's tone was tinged with coldness. "Once it loses its usefulness, you can tear it up whenever you want." If this so-called alliance were truly effective, the Third Shinobi World War would not have occurred. Therefore, Hanzo did not believe a single word of the covenant mentioned in Hiruzen Sarutobi's letter. "Lord Hanzo, shall I remind you?" Kakashi Hatake looked up at Hanzo in front of him, his tone still gentle, but his words caused the expressions of Hanzo and the others from Aimgakure to change. Once the land of fire goes to war with the land of wind and the land of earth, the land of rain will inevitably become the best route of attack for Iwagakure and Sunagakure, and I think you know their character all too well. At this point, Kakashi Hatake paused for a moment, then smiled slightly and said, "When that time comes, will you choose to let them pass, allowing those desperate ninjas to burn, kill, and plunder, or will you choose to fight to the death? If you resist, where will you get food, weapons, and other resources to meet your logistical needs? This is the common Achilles heel, and Achilles heel of Hanzo, Aimgakure, and the Land of Rain. End of this chapter. Chapter 67. Has the once arrogant Hanzo become an old dog? Chapter 67. Has the once arrogant Hanzo become an old dog? Hanzo opened his mouth, but couldn't utter a word. He hadn't expected that Konoha was already so aware of the current situation of the Land of Rain and Aimgakure. Why did he finally lose his temper and declare war on the 5 great nations during the Second Shinobi World War? It should be noted that before the Second Shinobi World War had fully broken out, the disputes between the 5 great nations were still very restrained and limited to localized frictions. At that time, the Land of Rain did not refuse to become a buffer zone for the great nations. However, the faces of Sunagakure and Iwagakure were truly appalling, especially those Sunagakure ninjas who were practically driven mad by poverty. In the Land of Rain, they not only attack ninjas, but also show no regard for civilian casualties during battles. Many Sand Village ninjas even engage in arson, murder, and looting, and the Kazekage turns a blind eye to it. Since Sunagakure's finances were already in a bad state, plundering civilians could actually alleviate the village's financial burden. Anyway, it's not like we're robbing civilians from the Wind Kingdom. The lives of civilians in small countries are the least valuable. Therefore, Hanzo, who was still young at the time, could no longer tolerate it and directly overturned the table, leading Aimgakure to rebel against the 5 great nations. But back then he was really young, really proud, full of ambition and dreams, and full of vigor. He vowed to change the Rain Kingdom and bring peace to it, believing that he could change the world on his own. He felt that he was special, that he and his companions were like the protagonists in a story, and that the protagonists and their companions would never die. But when he was wounded in the war and reached out to touch the bloodied corpses of his comrades, and watched helplessly as more and more people were worn down and starved to death, he understood that no one in this world was special. No one was. Therefore, having come to terms with reality, he spared Jiraiya, Orochimaru, and Tsunade, who were his enemies. Because at that time, the Land of Rain and Aimgakure were almost out of supplies and resources, and simply could not withstand Hiruzen Sarutobai's hysterical anger after losing his disciple. Therefore, having come to terms with reality, he joined forces with Danzo to kill Yahiko, who resembled him in his youth. Because at that time, he believed that everything Yahiko said was nothing but unrealistic fantasy that would only shake his hard-won power and status and push the Land of Rain into an abyss. But now Hanzo is starting to regret it. If that young man were still alive, if that guy named Nagato were still alive, if he hadn't attacked the Akatsuki, if Aimgakure had a successor. The reason why the Land of Rain was able to neither win nor lose in the Second Shinobi World War was simply because of Hanzo's existence. At that time, he was still at the peak of his ninja career, but now he is powerless and old, which means that the Land of Rain has completely lost its last bargaining chip. Now, faced with the shameless plundering of Iwagakure and Sunagakure, unless he and Aimgakure choose not to resist, if they choose to fight back again, they will quickly run out of ammunition and food. Therefore, it seems that their only option now is to cooperate with Konoha. No, to put it nicely, it's cooperation, but in reality, it's dependence. After a long silence, Hanzo turned his gaze to the Aimgakure members behind him, his voice slightly hoarse, and asked, "What are you all thinking?" Upon hearing this, he suddenly felt nauseous. He knew that he was not giving them the opportunity to choose, but rather the responsibility to choose. He is running away from the choices he should have made, and running away from the responsibilities he should have borne. He can't even face himself right now. He became the kind of person he used to despise the most. As he expected, the people of Aimgakure fell silent. They were not unaware of Aimgakure's current predicament. The land of rain simply did not have the resources to meet logistical needs and could not support their resistance in the Second Shinobi World War. The foundation and strength of a great power are far beyond what the land of rain can compare to. However, even so, they still hoped to see Lord Hanzo act decisively as he had in the past, so that Konoha would understand that Aimgakure was not weak and could not be bullied, and that Hanzo's authority was not something a teenager could challenge. Even if the consequence of making this choice is that they have to sacrifice their lives, they are willing to follow Hanzo. But now Lord Hanzo has compromised. Disappointed. Perhaps, but this is the best option for Aimgakure right now. Do you understand? Perhaps there are exceptions, but relying on a powerful nation with whom they share a deep-seated blood feud, they find it difficult to convince themselves otherwise. Shame, anger, resentment, confusion, helplessness. The breath that had been building up inside him seemed to have been released, and his hand, holding the weapon, felt weak. Seeing this, Kakashi Hatake breathed a sigh of relief, realizing that Hanzo had truly changed, and that there shouldn't be any problems with this negotiation. Just as he was about to say something, Pat! A drop of red water fell from the top of the tower, hitting the ground and splashing, breaking the suffocating and oppressive silence. Snap, snap. Standing next to Hanzo, Shinta subconsciously looked up, only to find a few drops of blood landing on his dry lips. The familiar, rusty smell startled him. Click! An extremely abrupt sound rang out, particularly jarring in the desolation, crisp like a silver bottle shattering. The glass dome at the top of the tower shattered, and shards of glass fell from the sky onto the crowd below. It was as if a giant hand had pulled back the curtain, and a noisy wind surged in from above. Immediately, a whistling wind arose from above, and a dark shadow plummeted down at high speed, landing right between Kakashi Hatake and Hanzo. Bang! The Konoha and Aimgakure members instinctively took a few steps back, but crimson blood gushed out, splattering onto their faces and leaving dark red marks. They looked at the deformed figure falling from above with disbelief and astonishment. It was a twisted and deformed corpse, its head twisted several times and only connected to its neck by skin. The face showed visible shock and fear, and horrifying blood flowed on the open ground. Instead of horrifying wounds, the body was twisted, as if torn apart by brute force. Like a towel that has been wrung out forcefully, the flesh and bones twist and spin out, the pale bones piercing through the skin like thorns, a cruelty and pain that is visible to the naked eye. It's you guys. Hanzo subconsciously looked at Kakashi Hatake in front of him, only to find that Kakashi Hatake was giving him the same look. It wasn't him. Someone interfered. Seeing the surprise and doubt in each other's eyes, the two realized this almost simultaneously and immediately looked up. Right in front of the shattered glass dome, a figure stood suspended in midair. The dim moonlight behind him illuminated the surroundings, clearly revealing the terrified and panicked faces of the people below, and exposing the filth and depravity within the entire tower. This is truly disappointing. The once arrogant Hanzo has now had his spine broken and turned into an old dog. He looked down at the crowd below, his words full of mockery as he announced his presence. It will be available for purchase next Friday, and there will be a lot of updates. Please vote with your monthly tickets QAQ. End of this chapter. Chapter 60, 8 You May Call Me Shadow. Good evening. A gentle, smiling voice came from above. If you don't mind, you can call me Shadow. The shadows spread out like a spider web, clinging to the surrounding walls as if spider silk were stuck to them, shattering the sky above the dome. Hinata Kumakawa stood in the center of the spider web, looking down at the people below. Several other figures were bound around him, struggling like insects caught in a spider web, yet bound by the spider silk-like shadows like pupae. It must be admitted that the Nara clan's shadow techniques, combined with the diamond sealing technique to seal chakra, are indeed very suitable for Hyuga Kumakawa, who possesses the shadow robe. His shadow robe was equivalent to the physical form of a shadow, and in terms of lethality and agility, it was incomparable to shadows and chains. The intimidation and terror brought about by this bizarre ability can be seen from the terrified expressions on the faces of the crowd below. But, looking at the twisted, unfamiliar corpse, Hanzo laughed in anger. He glanced at Hyuga Kumakawa above, then looked at Hate Kakashi in front of him and said in a cold tone, "It's quite a lively day. Anyone dares to trespass on my territory and play tricks." Upon hearing this, Kakashi, who had been staring intently upwards, subconsciously looked away and turned to Hanzo in front of him, wanting to explain, only to find that the figure in front of him had already disappeared. Above, reflected in Hinata Kumakawa's pupils, a figure rapidly approached. With his Kusarigama in both hands, Hanzo charged toward Hyuga Kumakawa, his long platinum gold hair billowing in the wind, his eyes filled with a cold, sharp gaze as he looked at Hyuga Kumakawa. Die! As soon as he finished speaking, the Kusarigama in his hand slashed out, cutting through the air with a sharp, piercing whistle. It was ruthless and decisive, so fast that the blade was not visible. Only the edge reflecting the thin moonlight could be seen. Although the blade was sharpened to a bright shine, the stench of blood still lingered on it, clearly indicating that it had been soaked in countless amounts of blood. But in the next moment, reflected in Hanzo's pale golden pupils, the figure covered in black clothes did not move, but a sharp, knife-like black shadow lashed out from behind. Clang! The black shadow clashed with the blade, producing a sharp, metallic clang. A burst of intense sparks erupted in the air between the two, like a blooming iron tree, illuminating Hanzo's slightly constricted pupils. However, it was only for a moment before Hanzo's pupils narrowed again. He yanked the chain connecting the sickle, pulling it back at an even faster speed, and then spun around in the air, flinging the sickle out again. Out! With a soft laugh, several dark tentacles extended again, transforming into blades that swung out and created a trail of black afterimages. Buzz! The sound of something cutting through the air was like the loud chirping of an insect, meeting Hanzo's spinning, slashing blade. Clang, clang, clang. Sparks burst down like raindrops, and the sharp blade light generated by the collision swept across like a raging tide, leaving behind traces of the rampage of wild beasts' claws and fangs. Within seconds, dozens or even hundreds of collisions occurred, with sharp, clashing sounds of weapons clashing, exploding in rapid succession. Puff! Just then, a splatter of blood hit the ground. The intertwined sword light suddenly stopped, and the figure that was half hidden in the air was pulled away and fell back to the ground. Lord Hanzo. Shendo was about to speak when he suddenly stopped, stunned. A line of blood appeared on Hanzo's brow, slowly splitting open to reveal the bright red flesh beneath. That guy. Feeling the slight numbness in his arms and hands, Hanzo forcefully suppressed the slight trembling. He raised his head with a solemn expression, and Kakashi Hatake, who had witnessed the whole thing, also had a slight change in expression as he looked up at the figure above. It's not a shadow technique of the Nara clan. Rather, it's more like a bloodline limit. Who is it? You've gotten old, Hanzo. Hinata Kumakawa's tone sounded even more dull and tedious to everyone. That's right. You are ultimately just a human, just like the weapon you use called Kusakama. No matter how sharp it was in your hands, it doesn't change the fact that it was just a farm tool. Hanzo's expression darkened slightly. Jinta, who was beside him, snapped out of his shock, looked up sharply, his face contorted with anger, and said, "You bastard." Puff. The words that were on the tip of his tongue were swallowed back down along with his saliva as his throat bobbed up and down. Reflected in Shinda's trembling, terrified pupils, a long, thin, spear-like black tentacle sank deep into the ground beneath his feet, causing the hard bricks to shatter and white ash to scatter. A line of blood appeared on his forehead, and blood oozed from the wound, gradually soaking his face. The speed at which the thrust came down was so fast that only Kakashi and Hanzo saw it. SHH, adults are talking, children shouldn't interrupt. Hinata Kumakawa's voice carried a hint of gentle laughter, but at this moment, Shinta couldn't laugh at all, only feeling fear as sharp, black tentacles emerged from beneath his feet. "Who are you?" At this moment, Hanzo realized that this guy didn't seem to have much hostility. Everything he had done since his appearance seemed to be more about showing off his strength. "Why? I'm very curious." Hyuga Kumakawa did not answer Hanzo's question. Instead, he looked at Kakashi and the people of Konoha and said with a smile, "You are standing in the land of rain, on this land that has been trampled by great powers and drenched in blood, on this land that weeps silently in humiliation. They are still being asked whether they want to be pigs waiting to be slaughtered, or to smash their knees, kneel down, and stick out their tongues like dogs. How do you feel when you say these things?" These words immediately created a tense and oppressive atmosphere, which had been broken earlier. The Rain Village ninja instinctively looked at the Konoha members, and when he felt their hateful gazes, Kakashi Hate's heart skipped a beat. This guy who suddenly appeared is actually stirring up the hatred of the Aimgakure ninja towards the great powers. Does he want to obstruct the alliance? Who exactly is this guy? And this bizarre ability? Kakashi Hate stared intently at the figure above, his entire body shrouded in a black robe formed from shadows, making it impossible to see the face within the deep shadows. Just then, Kakashi suddenly noticed that Hyuga Kumakawa's breathing had become rapid and heavy. He subconsciously turned his head and saw a dazed face. Hinata Kumakawa's voice was a little hoarse. "I can't see his face. It feels like he's a monster." "Monster? Which monster?" Upon hearing this, Kakashi Hate was taken aback for a moment, but quickly realized what was happening. He remembered the monster mentioned in the intelligence report, the one who instantly killed Magnet, released Ninja Troy, and nearly 100 Cloud Village ninjas. His pupils immediately contracted. Could it be that monster? No, that's not right. The abilities they display are different, and their personalities seem to be different as well. That's enough. Hanzo broke the increasingly oppressive atmosphere with a deep voice, looking up at Hyuga Kumakawa and asking again, "Tell me, what exactly do you want to do?" "I'm here to make a deal with you." Now that the Aimgakure ninja's hatred for Konoha has been reignited, Hyuga Kumakawa no longer avoids the question about Hanzo. He manipulated the people wrapped up like pupae to his side and laughed. "But the land of rain is really full of holes. I found so many rats along the way. Consider these people my welcoming gift to you, sir." As soon as he finished speaking, Hyuga Kumakawa raised his hand and clenched it slightly, instantly tightening the black shadows that enveloped those people. Puff, puff, puff. Chapter 69, Sakumo and Rin, left outside the Pure Land. Snap, snap, snap. The tower, which had been relatively quiet and rainless, was now filled with the noisy and chaotic sound of rain. No, that wasn't rain. It was a massive amount of blood, the blood he had squeezed out, pouring down from above like a floodgate being opened. Feeling the warmth of the blood dripping all over their bodies, the crowd was instead chilled to the bone. Soon, as Hinata Kumakawa loosened the restraints of the shadow, the spider web seemed to transform into a high-powered meat grinder. Chunks of flesh mixed with blood rained down, hitting the ground the walls, and the feet of the people from Aimgakure and Konoha below. Such cruel methods had a psychological impact even on these seasoned ninjas. I Hanzo looked up at the dark figure above and said, in a deep voice, "You're saying these people are all rats who infiltrated the land of rain. All that the other party is doing now is clearly to tell him that the land of rain has become the target of everyone's hatred, and that a great power has its eyes on him. More and more spies have infiltrated the land of rain, their targets being Aimgakure, Hidden Rain Village, and its legend." Hanzo was far more terrified than by the empty talk of those people in Konoha. There's more than just these. Hyuga Kumakawa's gaze swept over the Aimgakure members behind Hanzo with a half-smile. Seemingly having overheard something, a few people in the crowd subtly changed their expressions. "And what exactly do you mean by deal?" Hanzo, unaware of Hyuga Kumakawa's deeper meaning, continued to ask. "What Konoha can give you, we can give you too. What Konoha cannot give you, we can still give you." Hyuga Kumakawa looked down at the crowd below and laughed. "I only want to see Hanzo and Aimgakure, who once dared to resist the hegemony of the five great nations for the sake of peace and dignity. Exchanging points for food is incredibly cheap, easily meeting the needs of Aimgakure." Of course, Hyuga Kumakawa didn't have such good intentions. He just wanted to make the ninja world more chaotic and make the land of rain the center of war between major powers once again. He needs to prepare everything for creating the virtual world before Orochimaru finds the space-time hole, including a large number of resentful souls who died and a way to absorb and control those souls. Hinata Kumakawa didn't want the void he created to turn around and help others attack him. Therefore, he needed to cultivate one or two test subjects in advance, and Hinata Kumakawa had already made his choice in terms of the method of absorbing and controlling souls and the selection of test subjects. The Six Paths Ninja Tool Box of Bliss that appeared in the original theatrical film Blood Prison can absorb human obsessions and emotions, so modifying it shouldn't be a problem. Hinata Kumakawa pondered to himself, as for the selection of test subjects. If I remember correctly, Hatake Sakumo and Nohara Rin seem to have been unable to enter the Pure Land due to their obsessions, and have remained in the gap between the ninja world and the Pure Land ever since. If Sakumo Hatake and Rin Nohara were trained into hollows, what expressions would Kakashi and Obito have? It seems quite interesting. At this moment, Kakashi Hatake was unaware that the guy above had already set his sights on his deceased father and friend. Laugh. Everyone, including Kakashi Hatake, was stunned for a moment after hearing Hyuga Kumakawa claim that he could give everything Konoha could give. Then, as if they had heard a joke, some of them actually laughed out loud in such a depressing and bloody scene. Because this guy's tone was really too arrogant, and he was really shameless. There are some things that money can't buy. Only Kakashi Hatake keenly noticed the word "we" in the other person's words, and his heart skipped a beat. As expected, the other party was not an individual, but an organization or force. That monster might be one of them. Lord Hanzo. Thinking of this, Kakashi Hatake looked at Hanzo in front of him and said in a deep voice, "You should think carefully about whether you believe this guy of unknown origin or Konoha and the land of fire." Upon hearing this, Hanzo and the people of Aimgakure, who had been slightly moved, fell silent again. Kakashi Hatake narrowed his dead fish eyes slightly and opened his mouth as if to tell everyone to take action. Hanzo's gaze suddenly turned cold, as if he had sensed his intention, and he said in a cold voice, "Once you leave Aimgakure and the land of rain, I don't care what you do, but if you dare to make a move here." Upon hearing this, Kakashi Hatake frowned, momentarily at a loss for words. "I don't care whether you believe it or not, I just want you to understand." Hinata Kumakawa lowered his voice and said in a deep voice, As long as those great nation ninjas continue to run rampant on your land, you, and even your families, will never have a future. As long as you continue to deceive yourselves, as long as people from other countries, when they mention the land of rain in their casual conversation, will utter that same contemptuous sneer, you will not be able to live as living, breathing human beings. As long as this weeping nation remains weak and powerless on the map of the ninja world, your dignity as human beings will never exist. The land was trampled by great powers, villages were swallowed up by war, relatives were dragged into the slaughter, farmland was destroyed, and houses were burned. After each great war, all that was left for you was devastation and mountains of corpses. At this point, Hyuga Kumakawa paused, then looked at Hanzo and the others again and asked, Hanzo, tell me now, can you and the people behind you accept this outcome? The sky outside the tower was suddenly torn apart, and lightning turned everything in front of them white. Only Hyuga Kumakawa cast a deep shadow, enveloping the Konoha and Aimgakure members below. Boom! With the sound of thunder, the rain seemed to grow heavier and more intense. Hinata Kumakawa's words touched a nerve among the Aimgakure members, stirring up the most violent and restless hatred deep within their hearts. Resentment, anger, and hatred seemed to come alive, flowing inch by inch through their veins. The great powers have never truly treated them as human beings. When the war ends and the great powers sit at the negotiating table to divide their interests and sign a peace treaty, the suffering of the Rain country is often deliberately ignored or downplayed. The major powers are only concerned with the balance of power and the distribution of interests among themselves. The Rain countries function as a buffer zone and battlefield is preserved, and no one cares about the deaths of its citizens. The resentment and despair in the hearts of the people of the Rain country are like the continuous rain, accumulating without any outlet. This experience of being used, abandoned, and ignored is the breeding ground for extreme ideologies and resistance movements. Just like Hanzo in the past, just like the Akatsuki organization in the past, just like the future pain. Lord Hanzo, he's right. Shinta, standing beside Hanzo, had bloodshot eyes. Finally, he mustered his courage and looked at Hanzo, saying in a deep voice, We want to live. Living is important, but we want to live as dignified and free human beings. What we want is not the condescending pity of a great power, nor is it a life we beg for. What we want is true human dignity and peace in the land of rain. You have already proven that these things must be fought for, not begged for. I'd rather die fighting against a great power than become cannon fodder for those bastards. Upon hearing this, the other Aimgakure ninja chimed in, shouting, Lord Hanzo, cooperating with Konoha is like asking a tiger for its skin. Lord Hanzo, this great nation has absolutely no integrity. Lord Hanzo, please continue to lead us in battle. Oh no, we can't wait any longer. Kakashi Hatake looked up at the figure above, his lifeless eyes gradually tightening and solidifying, and he made a hand gesture behind his back. This gesture means, get ready, get started. Chapter 70, Between You and Me, Distance Has No Meaning. Faced with the agitated crowd of Aimgakure, the Konoha villagers realized the situation was dire, but they were powerless to do anything about it. This is an irreconcilable hatred between Konoha and Aimgakure. Even Jiraiya could only attempt to atone by teaching Nagato and the other two, but could not eradicate their sins. Kakashi had already suppressed Aimgakure's hatred and loathing through coercion and inducement, but now that guy had stirred it up again. Therefore, the only solution is killing that despicable guy who suddenly appeared became the only option for Hanzo and Aimgakure. You. Faced with the commotion from the Aimgakure members behind him, Hanzo instinctively opened his mouth, but seeing their indignant faces, he was momentarily speechless. They had no idea what they were facing or what they were fighting against. The foundation and strength of a great power are far beyond what the land of rain can compare to. If he were still young. Hanzo, are you still hesitating? Hinata Kumakawa sighed and said, look at you now, just like those pitiful prostitutes whose beauty has faded, hoping to use heavy makeup to cover up their frivolous and dissolute ugliness and wipe away the wrinkles that are gradually deepening at the corners of their eyes. How pitiful! He paused for a moment, looked down at Hanzo, and smiled slightly. I know what you're hesitating about. What if I told you I could restore your physical condition to its peak, giving you strength far greater than before? Upon hearing this, Hanzo abruptly looked up and blurted out, what did you say? Almost at the same moment, Hinata Kumakawa uttered those words. Hate Kakashi instantly realized that he couldn't wait any longer. Let's do it. With his low shout, the Konoha members, who had already refined their chakra, tensed up and quickly responded by forming hand seals. Water release, breaking the torrent. Water release, water chaos waves. Water release, water wave hands. Water release, water dragon bullet technique. Boom! The sound of water roared up at that moment, and the water curtain, several meters high, seemed to shoot straight into the sky. Blue light poured down, enveloping everything in front of us. The surging water from the breached dam was guided by hand seals and swept up by an invisible force. Like a tornado, it began to writhe and twist around the Konoha members, and under their control, it condensed and shaped into a ferocious dragon head. Stop, you! Hanzo hadn't yet recovered from Hyuga Kumakawa's words when he suddenly saw the Konoha members all forming hand seals and using ninjutsu. He said something with a look of shock and anger on his face, but it was drowned out by the deafening sound of the water. Lightning release, Chidori, X2. Kakashi Hate's hands moved rapidly like butterflies flitting among flowers as he used Chidori to add lightning chakra to his water-style ninjutsu. But then he heard someone beside him call out the same name as him. What? He turned his head in utter astonishment and saw the familiar, chilling, blue-white, violent electric current emanating from Hinata Kumakawa's palm, making his scalp tingle. He immediately wondered if he was under a genjutsu. No, how come you know Chidori? Aren't you from the Hyuga clan? But now is not the time to ask questions or think things through. Kakashi poured his lightning release chakra into the water dragon, and so did Hyuga Kumakawa, who was standing next to him. Buzzing. The ear-piercing shriek of lightning was instantly amplified to its limit. The moment Chidori's lightning pierced the water dragon's body, it spread like billions of wildly spreading blue blood vessels, instantly covering the water dragon's huge, winding body. Roar! The water dragon, several meters in diameter and composed of electric current and flowing water, raised its head, opened its sharp teeth, and let out a silent roar at the figure above, tearing towards it with terrifying, overwhelming power. With the terrifying impact of the high-pressure water flow, several cracks even appeared in the tower's walls, seemingly about to engulf everything in front of it like a tide. Above the dense, dark spiderweb, the figure seemed completely unfazed. Hinata Kumakawa calmly watched the water dragon swing and bite towards him, slowly raising his arm in front of him. A black rosary was compressed and shaped into a shield by the shadow. Boom! The water dragon slammed into Hyuga Kumakawa with terrifying force, and a huge spray of water mixed with violent electricity shot into the sky instantly. A blinding flash of lightning erupted at the point of impact, and the currents spread and surged wildly, emitting a continuous crackling sound, illuminating the dim tower and the night as bright as day. White steam and burnt black smoke rose and spread instantly, while the tower, unable to bear the weight, began to crumble and crack. Damn it, get out! With a dark expression, Hanzo roared and led the Aimgakure members out without hesitation. But Kakashi Hatake ignored the falling rocks. He stared intently at the electric current and missed until a figure gradually emerged from the hazy fog, and an extremely chilling feeling suddenly surged up. Retreat! He roared in an almost hoarse voice, his leg muscles tensing instantly as he formed hand seals to unleash the body flicker technique without hesitation. His entire body was almost a black shadow, breaking through his own speed limit and shot backward like an arrow in an instant. The others reacted a step slower, raising their hands to form hand seals. But it was too late. Unfortunately, distance is meaningless between us. Hinata Kumakawa's tone was tinged with amusement. The shield that had been blocking his way returned to its original circular shape, revealing the shadow assassin beside him, which was compressed to its limit like a spring. He flipped his wrist, loosened his clenched fist, and lightly touched his lips. Bang! The voice was like a vengeful demon, and instantly countless sharp spikes shot out from beside him. The piercing shrieks echoed through the air, tearing through the mist and rain, creating numerous cavities and riddling them with countless holes, drawing several black streaks of water in the sky. This speed, this power, let alone a human body made of flesh and blood, it can even penetrate a steel plate. Looking at the falling spikes before them, the minds of the Konoha members went almost blank, their faces contorted with fear, their eyes fixed on the sharp spikes so close to them. Wow, so fast! The terrifying threat of death nearly drove them to the brink of collapse. Ah! They swung their weapons wildly, several blades flashing and changing direction at high speed, sparks flying and disappearing in front of them. Spikes aimed at their hearts and heads were barely deflected, but they couldn't stop other spikes from piercing their bodies. Clumps of blood blossomed. It pierced through everyone instantly like a nail through paper, leaving several bloody holes that pierced through their bodies with a shrill scream. The terrifying penetrating power of the punches doesn't linger in the flesh and bone. Instead, it pierces right through the body and penetrates even deeper. The blood splattered onto the surrounding walls, splashing out wave after wave of crescent-shaped droplets, turning them into a sea of crimson blood. Chapter 71, White Zetsu. What the hell are you? Half. Kakashi Hatake practically threw himself out. He collapsed onto the pool of water outside the tower, panting heavily. Fear and pushing his limits caused sweat to stream down his face. His legs were almost numb, covered with charred marks from his feet to his thighs, his muscles spasming and twitching uncontrollably, and dark red burns could even be seen under his skin. He clearly escaped by stimulating his body with lightning release chakra, leaving him no chance to even use earth release, earth flow wall to defend himself. So the others. Bang! A sickeningly loud cracking sound rang out, and two figures were instantly sent flying backward and crashed towards him. Kakashi Hatake instinctively reached out to catch them, but his feet slid backward several steps before he regained his balance. Frowning and looking down, I saw two familiar faces, and was immediately filled with surprise and joy. Hinata Kumakawa and Tenzo were both exhausted. The former was merely exhausted, while the latter's abdomen had been pierced, as if a piece of it had been ripped out while he was still alive. Yes, the rejuvenation technique doesn't require hand seals, and Yun Chuan actually saved Tianzang. I've got a basic understanding of that guy's abilities. He's troublesome, but if Yun Chuan helps, is there still a chance? Kakashi, Senpai. The Hyuga Kumakawa he caught spoke in a hoarse voice, seemingly exhausted, saying, "Hurry, Hanzo and those Aimgakure ninja are about to make their move." Upon hearing this, Kakashi Hatake felt as if he had been doused with cold water, instantly sobering up. Hanzo was persuaded by that guy. He and Yun Chuan alone could not deal with so many enemies. Kakashi Hatake staggered to his feet and looked up into the tower. Damn it, that guy who suddenly appeared. If it weren't for him, the alliance between Konoha and Aimgakure would have already been formed. And now, the dozen or so men he brought with him are probably all dead. The sounds inside the tower gradually subsided. Kakashi realized that it would be too late if they didn't leave now, so he could only grit his teeth and help the two of them escape. At the same time, inside the tower, Hanzo led the Rain Village ninjas in. They subconsciously twitched their nostrils, smelling the endless stench, and many of them turned slightly pale. What they saw was a bewitching crimson, like a pool of blood slashed open by an artery, the thick crimson blood already seeping into and engulfing the ground. Everyone instinctively looked up, and in the moonlight, a spiderweb woven by shadows hung silently in the air. Cruel, evil, bloody, and brutal, yet it possesses a unique, twisted beauty. Several Konoha ninjas who still had a breath left struggled in the air, suspended by the dark shadows, only to find that they could not use their chakra and could not break free. They could only curse helplessly. But as the shadows gradually covered their bodies from bottom to top, their curses turned into low sobs and pleas for mercy, and finally into a chilling silence. Everyone could smell the ruthless ferocity emanating from above, the terrifying, suffocating aura so palpable it was enough to make them tremble and clench their teeth in terror, fleeing in fear. Hans exhaled deeply, as if trying to expel the chill in his chest and the overwhelming stench of blood. "Do you mean what you said?" He looked at the dark figure above him and said in a deep voice, "We can buy the supplies at a 10% premium over the black market price, but what you said at the end." The land of Rain and Aimgakure have never lacked money. In fact, they are quite advanced in the steel industry. Moreover, Aimgakure is renowned for its assassination skills, and many people are accustomed to hiring Aimgakure ninjas to carry out assassinations, so they naturally have no shortage of missions to earn bounties. However, the land of Rain is short of food. In peacetime, it can be bought with money, but in wartime, trade will be cut off and food will be unavailable. Even if some merchants take the risk, they cannot afford the prices that have increased several times over. If Hyuga Kumakawa can truly provide food, they are truly willing to fight to the end against the five great nations. However, what Hanzo cared about most was that last sentence from the guy. "You mean a younger body and greater strength?" Hinata Kumakawa collected Tenzo's flesh and blood into a scroll, then stepped onto the invisible shadow, and under the watchful or fearful gazes of the crowd, walked down from the height step by step. And they finally saw the man's face clearly, a flowing black robe covering his entire body, obscuring his face from the deep shadows. Meeting Hanzo's gaze, which was cloudy but still sharp, Hyuga Kumakawa stopped in front of him and said with a soft laugh, "Don't move." As soon as he finished speaking, he reached out his hand to Hanzo. Jinder, who was standing to the side, changed his expression slightly and was about to step forward to stop him, but then he heard Hanzo say calmly, "Do as he says." The movements of Shinta and the Aimgakure members immediately froze, and at the same time, Hyuga Kumakawa placed his hand on Hanzo's shoulder. The next moment, black winding lines spread out from his palm and climbed up Hanzo's body. This is the abridged version of the wedge. Like the complete Karma, it has the ability to absorb and release ninjutsu, and also has certain effects of the Yin Seal and the Heavenly Curse Seal. Simply put, he can't replicate his complete genetic file like Momoshiki Otsutsuki. He can only parasitize at the chakra and soul level. Similar to how Minato and Kushina sealed a portion of Naruto's chakra in the original work, Hyuga Kumakawa was also able to communicate directly with the owner of the Karma through the chakra of the Karma. With this technique, Hyuga Kumakawa can do many things and can also silently approach those who cannot be approached with their true faces. Buzz, buzz. Feeling the gentle yet domineering chakra surge into his body, Hanzo frowned and opened his mouth as if to say something, but he suddenly stopped before he could speak. As he stared in disbelief, something white began to wriggle and grow from his shoulder. Ah! Accompanied by a horrified scream, a white, humanoid creature twisted and grew out, first its head, then its body. What the hell is this thing? X2. The white humanoid creature and Hanzo simultaneously let out sounds of fear. Hanzo didn't know what it was, but Yun Chuan knew it very well. White Zetsu. It has been living parasitically in Hanzo's body, responsible for monitoring Hanzo and transmitting intelligence, and has been very stable for the past few years. Until this guy suddenly appeared. How is that possible? White Zetsu twisted and contorted, emerging from Hanzo's body like a squeezed-out white liquid, emitting a cry similar to a human's, its white face filled with terror. What the hell are you? That black thing, which was clearly similar to chakra, actually squeezed it out of Hanzo's body. It was created using the Jido Mazo and Hashirama cells, but the chakra it exuded felt even more ferocious and domineering than the Hashirama cells. It's like treating Hanzo's body as your own, not allowing any foreign objects to remain on your territory. That's a question I should be asking you. Before White Zetsu could get a response, it was grabbed by the neck by Hanzo, who looked shocked and furious, and was violently pulled out of his body. What the hell are you? Hanzo stared at it intently, his expression contorted with rage, and asked, "How did you get inside me? When exactly did it?" Chapter 72, The Attack of Pain. Just as Hanzo was questioning White Zetsu in shock and anger, among the Rain village members who were standing there in a daze behind him, several figures suddenly turned around and ran away at the same time. Even Hanzo was caught off guard by this scene, but it didn't surprise Hyuga Kumikawa at all. Now that you're here, do you really want to leave? Hinata Kumikawa slightly raised his eyelids, and several dark figures emerged from his body, stabbing out. Puff, puff. The dark figure pierced the chests of the men with precision, like a spear, causing them to let out painful screams. Upon seeing this, the members of Aimgakure immediately snapped out of their daze, their expressions changing drastically. One of them even angrily questioned, "What are you doing?" "Shut up, you idiot." Before the man could finish speaking, and before anyone else could make a move, Hanzo interrupted him with a cold voice. "Open your eyes wide and see if that's a comrade." Upon hearing this, the Rain village members, who had been showing anger, were stunned. They subconsciously looked closely and realized that what had splattered on the ground was not scarlet blood, but white liquid. Those whose chests were pierced by the black shadow spikes were gradually eroded and covered by the shadow, their white bodies forced to be revealed amidst screams. These people are all White Zetsu in disguise. How is this possible? Shinta's voice trembled as he stood beside Hanzo. Kita, Akihiro, Toshiya. Hyuga Kumikawa ignored the fear of the Aimgakure members and turned his gaze back to the white Zetsu in Hanzo's hand. These are all excellent offerings that can be used to perform the impure world reincarnation technique. We can't let Hanzo kill us and waste our lives. Thinking of this, the black shadow spread like liquid, reaching towards White Zetsu's body. Hanzo frowned and released his grip upon seeing this. "No, no, don't come any closer, you monster." Baiju gurgled and whimpered in his throat, like a frightened child, screaming in terror and wildly waving his arms, trying to get the thing off his body. But it was all in vain. Once it was completely wrapped up in a black pupa, it lost all its life. Gyudong, Gyudong. The moonlight shone on the surface of the pupa, causing it to wriggle slightly, which made people feel uneasy from the bottom of their hearts. Deep within a cave in the land of rain, a giant pitcher plant quietly closed its eyes, and Pain sat on a stone seat with his eyes closed. Just then, the stone wall suddenly began to writhe, and a white Zetsu suddenly emerged from it. Original body. As if sensing something incredible, it looked at the pitcher plant sitting beside it with a surprised expression and said, "The white Zetsu responsible for monitoring Aimgakure have all suddenly lost contact at the same time." Upon hearing this, the pitcher plant suddenly opened, revealing a black and white face, and exclaimed, "Impossible." But the next moment, it sensed it for itself and realized that it had indeed lost contact. What happened? Pain's emotionless, deathly voice rang out. Zetsu looked at Pain beside him and said, "Something might have happened to Hanzo and Aimgakure." Upon hearing this, Pain's brows furrowed slightly on his usually expressionless face. "Could it be one of the 5 great nations?" he asked coldly. "Didn't you say yesterday that they discovered many spies had infiltrated the land of rain?" "No," Ju shook his head confidently. "They haven't discovered my abilities." Although the white Zetsu abilities that Madara obtained from the Jido Mazo are basically the same, some special white Zetsu individuals actually have their own strengths. For example, the half-white Zetsu possessed by Black Zetsu is one of the 2 most powerful white Zetsu created by Madara Uchiha. The other is the vortex white Zetsu that Obito once wore, which is the real Tobai. The half-body white Zetsu is the most skilled of all white Zetsu in Mayfly technique and disguise technique. It can not only move at high speed to any place by intervening in organic networks such as plant roots and underground water flow, but also cut off all breath during activation. It can also absorb the chakra of others and simulate the same appearance and chakra, so that even the most familiar people and sensory ninjas cannot recognize it. A Fei is a special individual who excels in combat. When his body is wrapped in someone else's body, he can use that person's abilities, enhance that person's overall abilities, and even use extremely powerful wood-release techniques. Those white Zetsu sent out to secretly gather intelligence were created by splitting and multiplying from the half-body white Zetsu. Even if they were not as good as the half-body white Zetsu, their ability to disguise and hide was absolutely terrifying. How could Hanzo and those spies possibly have discovered this? But why at this particular time? Why did it have to happen just when they were preparing to attack Aimgakure? And why did it have to be when Lord Madara was away from Konoha? But in that case, Pain remained silent for a long time, seemingly as if Nagato, who was controlling him from behind, had withdrawn his consciousness. After a moment he stood up and calmly said, "I had already planned to kill Hanzo and take back control of Aimgakure. Let's go now." Although his words carried a questioning tone, his tone and behavior clearly indicated that he did not care whether he agreed or not. "What?" Zetsu was also stunned for a moment upon hearing this, and the other half of the black Zetsu also opened its eyes. But before it could say anything, Pain glanced at it with indifferent eyes. "Is there a problem?" he said coldly. "Well, why don't we wait for Lord Madara to return before making any plans?" Zetsu suggested tentatively. The Madara-sama, it refers to his naturally Uchiha Obito, who inherited the name Madara. Pain gave it a deep look and stated the facts calmly. "We are currently just partners." Having said that, he didn't wait for Ju to say anything more and disappeared into the cave. Nagato and Konan, who were behind Pain, did not trust Zetsu and the masked man who called himself Uchiha Madara. It's nothing more than a cooperative relationship of mutual exploitation and suspicion. "What do we do now?" Baiju asked. I Black Zetsu's face was completely black, revealing no expression, yet he felt a strange unease in his heart. The sudden change reminded it of that person who seemed to be from outer space, but it could also be a case of overreaction and paranoia. This is the feeling of suddenly encountering another unfamiliar player on a chessboard where you are the only one playing. Black Zetsu had not urged Nagato and Obito before, and had always maintained a low-key and calm demeanor. But that's because of its control over the past and future of the ninja world. Even someone as powerful as Uchiha Madara was just a pawn in its game. But now the appearance of people from outer space has completely shattered its composure and arrogance. If these two Rinnegan were not something it had waited 1,000 years to obtain, given Black Zetsu's personality, it would probably have already stolen the Rinnegan and hidden away, or at least waited until it confirmed the identity of the extraterrestrial before reappearing. Unfortunately, no, this is the best and last chance. We must be extremely careful and cannot allow any accidents to happen. However, as Madara's appendage, it cannot forcibly stop Nagato, since Nagato does not fully trust them yet, and stopping them would only arouse Nagato's suspicion. Let Tobai go and follow Nagato. After a moment of hesitation, it spoke in a hoarse, low voice. Let's go find Lord Madara. Only he can persuade Nagato. Chapter 73. Go forth, hero, and show the arrogant god what's what. In the land of fire, in a forest, the rising sun shines like a drop of blood. The dust was soaked with thick blood, and stepping on it made a chilling sound. Uchiha Itachi stood there, his pupils trembling, several lifeless corpses lying behind him. Those were his Jonin teacher and classmates from Team 3, as well as the caravan they were supposed to protect on this mission. There was no noisy fighting or roaring. There was only a silent figure walking towards us, and life was like a withered leaf swept away by a gentle breeze. The bond we had so painstakingly built with our companions was so easily taken from us. You, Uchiha Itachi stared intently at the masked figure in front of him, his hand holding the kunai trembling, whether from fear or anger. He's still too inexperienced. He hasn't been a genin for very long. Fear, like a cold, venomous snake, pierced his bones and froze his limbs. Until the last remaining genin teammate standing in front of him gripped his kunai and rushed towards the masked guy like a moth to a flame. Thump! The headless body swayed and fell, blood flowing out and emitting a bloody smell, turning Itachi Uchiha's eyes blood red. Looking at the two Tomo in those eyes, and that inexplicably familiar sadness and anger, Obito Uchiha suddenly became interested. Did he awaken the Sharingan because of the death of his companion, and was the first Sharingan he awakened a double Tomo Sharingan? This kid seems a bit different. With this in mind, his initial urge to take action diminished considerably. He put the valuables into a scroll, and the figure disappeared from Uchiha Itachi's sight. When he reappeared, Obito Uchiha was standing on a tree, frowning as he looked at the pitcher plant that was poking its head out from under the tree. "What happened, Jew?" he said in a hoarse, low voice. "Why did you come looking for Nagato when you weren't watching over him in the land of rain?" "Lord Madara, something terrible has happened." Zetsu looked up at Obito and shouted. "All the white Zetsu monitoring Hanzo have lost contact. Nagato suspects something has happened in Aimgakure and has gone to kill Hanzo. We can't stop him at all. He should be almost at Aimgakure by now." Upon hearing this, Obito's expression beneath his mask darkened slightly, and a strong sense of unease welled up in his heart. Meanwhile, inside the tower of Aimgakure village, in a room where no one was ever allowed to enter, Hyuga Kumakawa and Hanzo sat facing each other, while Shinta and another Aimgakure ninja named Haiji waited on the side. "Shadow, what the hell are these things, and who put them on me?" Looking at the several white humanoid creatures shrouded and bound by black shadows, Hanzo's eyes still showed shock and anger. Although he has calmed down now, the bizarre ability and situation still somewhat agitates his sensitive nerves. He hadn't even noticed its existence from beginning to end, and he couldn't imagine how long that thing had been inside him. Just thinking about it sent chills down his spine. He thought the leak was because he had an inside man, but he never expected that the problem was with him from the very beginning. If this kind of monster were to appear again, would I still be unable to detect it? These things are called white zetsu, and they are indeed a bit troublesome, but since we have reached a cooperation agreement, I will naturally help you eliminate the hidden dangers. Hyuga Kumikawa carefully put away the white zetsu, then looked at Hanzo again with a smile and said, "However, it might hurt a bit now, so you'll have to bear it." Upon hearing this, Hanzo had no choice but to suppress his unease and doubts, and frowned as he said, "Aren't you underestimating me?" Hinata Kumikawa nodded, offering no further explanation, and placed his hand on Hanzo's shoulder, the patterns on his hand spreading out once more. But this time, the black lines were etched into Hanzo's body. Like plum blossoms blooming in winter, they gradually begin to be absorbed by flesh and blood. Next moment, ah, the moment the black patterns merged into his body, even though he had secretly prepared himself, the excruciating pain that felt like it was tearing him apart still caused Hanzo to let out a painful scream. Although he had endured countless pains, these were pains that originated from the cells and even the depths of his soul, and no other pain could compare to them. The excruciating pain, as if his soul were being torn apart, made his slightly bluish veins bulge, and it looked as if countless wriggling blue worms were crawling under his skin. Several bloody cracks even appeared on his exposed skin. "What's going on, Lord Hanzo?" Haiji was also startled, looking at Hanzo with a panicked expression, and instinctively tried to support him. Hinata Kumikawa stopped the two, shook his head, and said calmly, "This is a gift from that lord, and also the price Hanzo must pay." Cough. Seemingly because of what Hinata Kumikawa said, Hanzo curled up, clenched his teeth, and stopped screaming. His pale and aged face was twisted into a ferocious expression. Pain, the pain that tears the body apart, the pain that touches the soul. Unbeknownst to Hanzo, the wedge gradually became a shackle on his soul, with the end of the chain held in Hyuga Kumikawa's hand, but it also allowed Hanzo's aged body to be reborn. Soon, Hanzo's heart began to beat and contract violently, the sound of his heartbeat even echoing outside his body. Boom, dong dong. The blood surging in his veins seemed to transform into scorching magma, erupting at that moment along with the violently contracting and enlarging heart. A large amount of skeletal muscle begins to dissolve under the influence of the blood and is then torn apart and reshaped by an absolute force. The muscle fibers are wrapped and solidified like ropes under the skin, undergoing similar transformations in every part of the body. Lord Hanzo, you. Shinta and Haiji stared in disbelief at Hanzo's transformation, watching as Hanzo's withered, pale hair turned back to a bright gold, as if a dead tree had been reborn. Every cell in his body began to breathe, and a surge of life welled up from his increasingly thin body, gradually filling his withered and emaciated frame. This feeling. Hanzo felt as if his body, which had been dormant for over a decade, was melting away like ice and snow, and that his vibrant chakra was being transmitted throughout his body, awakening his vitality. This is what he has always longed for. Strength, vitality. The power flowed through his blood vessels and bones like magma, and his body temperature rose to a point that could be described as scalding hot. He needed to express this power and the joy in his heart. How to vent. Just then, as if hearing a sound, Hinata Kumikawa turned to look outside the tower. "Weren't you curious about who planted those white zetsu?" Hinata Kumikawa said with a smile, "He's here." Shinta and Haiji subconsciously turned their heads to look out the window. In the distance, they saw three figures dressed in black robes, with red clouds walking towards them through the wind and rain. Their robes fluttered in the gale, and their pupils shimmered with a deep, dark purple. He didn't need to sneak around. He was Pain, a god above humanity. He only needed to use absolute power to pull the corrupt hero off his dilapidated throne. Go. Looking at Hanzo, whose body was covered in black patterns, Hyuga Kumakawa said softly, "Let our arrogant god witness the power beyond the pinnacle of hero. Go tell him that the future may belong to him, but right now, at this moment, it still belongs to you." Hanzo's body trembled slightly, but this time it was not from the fear of death, but from the burning blood in his body. This hero from the land of rain, who once dared to resist the five great nations single-handedly, has now regained the strength and magnanimity he had lost due to old age. "Ha, you rascal!" He laughed out loud with an almost life-high spirit, and the next moment he suddenly stood up and disappeared from Hinata Kumakawa's sight. "Whoever this, sir, you're referring to, please thank him for me." "Hum." As soon as he finished speaking, Hanzo appeared on the top of the tower. Looking at the three figures in the distance, a smile appeared on his plump face. He raised his hand, bit his finger, and let the blood splatter. Spiritual communication. As Hanzo's exhilarating roar echoed through the morning mist, the ground in the distance trembled and cracked open in several places. Roar! A massive, purplish-black monster emerged, raising its head and unleashing a terrifying roar that shook the heavens. Chapter 74, Ayuyahiko from Akatsuki. The sky was as grey as a tattered rag soaked in ink, and the continuous heavy rain enveloped the fields, making the muddy roads appear to meander and blurry in the rain curtain. Against this monotonous grey-black backdrop, four figures walked silently across the land. The figure in front was Pain, controlled by Nagato. His orange hair was soaked with rain and clung to his young but lifeless face. Behind Pain, the Deva path and the Usura path, both with equally expressionless faces, followed by Conan, whose long blue-purple hair was soaked by the rain. As Conan watched the hidden rain village gradually become clearer in the rain in the distance, she felt a strange sense of unease. Long Pain. She wasn't quite used to addressing Pain directly, so she looked at him and paused before correcting herself. "With just the current strength of the upper three paths, Pain, are you really safe facing Hanzo?" Pain did not immediately answer Zyronen's question, nor did he look back. Each step he took was still slow, as if he were inspecting this land whose order he would redefine. The sound of rain pattering on everything is the world's only main melody. Zyronan, I also used to respect him. Pain didn't turn around. His deep, calm voice pierced through the rain and reached Conan's ears clearly. But he's not the Hanzo he used to be. Hanzo is probably so old now that he can no longer even communicate with that salamander. Pain's gaze pierced through the fine rain curtain, landing on the distant tower that stood like a tombstone in the misty rain. His voice seemed colder than the surrounding temperature. Now he is having an affair with Shimura Danzo of Konoha, hiding in the tower and only caring about surviving. He is nothing more than a corpse that is about to die. Rain cannot cleanse the world of its sins and past betrayals. Pain's voice was flat, as if stating a truth. Only God can cleanse the filth of the ninja world and bring peace. Zyro Nan's eyes reflected the familiar, yet unfamiliar figure ahead, revealing not a trace of hesitation or pity, but only an absolutely cold will of judgment. The rain hit her face, icy cold, making her eyes look complicated. The unspeakable pain vanished in an instant, settling into a deathly calm. The lightness of the paper butterfly subsided, and the eyes regained their clarity and determination. Her response was almost blending into the sound of the rain, light and brief. The tone conveyed a resolute decision to let go of the past, and a determination to face the future that was to come, to be reshaped through pain, like an apostle following a deity into the unknown. As they approached the gates of Aimgakure, they could already see the Aimgakure ninjas guarding the area. "Stop!" Upon seeing the hazy figures in the rain and mist from afar, the two rain ninjas immediately became wary and shouted, "Who are you?" Pain had no intention of explaining to the ants, nor did he make any move to conceal himself. He simply raised his arm toward the two men. But at this time, Payne suddenly felt an extremely strong aura sweeping towards him from afar, like a tidal wave. Looking up, a figure appeared atop the emaciated tower in the distance. Payne, seemingly sensing something, Zyro Nan's expression changed slightly. Buzz. The ground beneath my feet trembled with a humming sound, as if something was churning underground, eager to break free of its confinement. Spiritual communication. A loud shout came from the horizon, the tone of which was unrestrained and arrogant. Click, click, click. A force suddenly pushed upwards, shattering the flat ground with unimaginable force and forming an arched, protruding stepped vault. Payne's eyes flickered slightly, and almost instinctively, he used the repulsive force to rise into the air. At the same time, a deafening explosion resounded throughout the heavens and earth. Roar! With the roar of wild beasts unleashed, dust and gravel shot into the sky, and the dust cloud instantly spread in all directions. In the hazy dust and mist, a giant shadow, like a leaping carp, emerged from the ground and pounced on Payne and Conan. Conan reacted only a moment slower than Payne. Her paper danced, transforming paper into wings and taking her into the air. But in her increasingly widened pupils, she could see the throat and tongue in the abyss-like maw below, the stench almost touching her face. Shinra Tensei. Payne raised his arm and aimed it at his feet. An invisible yet powerful repulsive force appeared in the rain, crushing the giant beast that was tearing at him. Bang! The giant shadow in the dust and mist fell uncontrollably, crashing to the ground and once again stirring up dust and mist. Three Paynes and Conan appeared in the distance, the latter's eyes showing a hint of solemnity as he looked at the blurry giant shadow in the dust and mist. Roll! Accompanied by a deafening roar, ripples spread across the rain, completely dispersing the dust and mist. Its brownish-purple body was incredibly robust, with 4 toes on its forelimbs and 5 toes on its hindlimbs. Its thick, laterally flattened tail gently patted the ground, yet it created tremors that reverberated across the earth. Its skin has no scales or hair, only a layer of mucous membrane covering it, and it keeps secreting liquid that drips down and corrodes the ground, producing wisps of white smoke, clearly indicating that it is extremely toxic. Salamander this size. Finally seeing the giant beast clearly, Zyro Nan's eyes showed surprise and heaviness. The salamander, despite its name, is not actually a fish, but an amphibian unique to the land of rain, and is one of the largest extant amphibians. Most salamanders are only 50 to 200 centimeters long. A salamander that is 2 or 3 meters long is already enough to be a ninja beast. Hanzo's companion, Shinta, has a 4-meter-long salamander. The salamander in front of them was already over 10 meters tall, just lying there, and its body length was incredibly terrifying. If the upper body stands upright, it is no different from a collapsing mountain peak, enough to make most people look up and feel fear and powerlessness. There is only one salamander of such enormous size in the entire ninja world, and only one person is capable of summoning such a massive salamander. Sancho Fish Ibushi. Payne hovered in midair, looking at the figure standing on the head of the salamander, and said calmly, "And Lord Hanzo." The two Aimgakure ninjas guarding the entrance to Aimgakure spoke in unison, their faces filled with disbelief and horror upon seeing the figure. "Lord Hanzo, you seemed so old yesterday. How come you suddenly look so young?" The doubt vanished in an instant, replaced by surprise and ecstasy. "It's Lord Hanzo. It's the former Lord Hanzo. This aura, this spirit, there's no mistake. It seems you are the owners of that disgusting white creature." Hanzo stood atop the salamander's head with his arms crossed, looking at Payne and Conan among the 4 figures. He frowned and said, "Wait, you two seem somewhat familiar." He looked at Payne's face, a face devoid of any expression or warmth, like a statue carved from cold rock, exuding only an almost empty and lifeless stillness. However, that cold face gradually overlapped in Hanzo's mind, with the face full of passion and hope deep in his memory. "You are," Hanzo's eyes narrowed slightly, and he said in a deep voice, "Yahiko from Akatsuki." "How could that be? Isn't Yahiko already dead?" "And those eyes." Chapter 75, tell me, where do your eyes come from? "Hanzo, I've come to hold your final funeral." Looking at Hanzo in the distance, Payne coldly said, "This is God's final mercy." As soon as he finished speaking, the Asura path and the human path separated, forming a triangular formation that surrounded Hanzo in the middle. To claim oneself as God. Hanzo frowned, staring at the increasingly familiar face. Apart from the appearance, there was no trace of the past. He said in a deep voice, "Are you really Yahiko? And those eyes, why are they with you?" "That person is dead. I am now Payne." With almost ruthless words uttered, Payne raised his arm expressionlessly, pointing his palm at Hanzo in the distance. The guiding force of all things. Standing atop the salamander, Hanzo felt his body sink as an irresistible, immense force gripped his entire body, violently pulling him toward Payne, who was suspended in the air in the distance. The black rod slid out of Payne's sleeve and was held in his hand, ready to stab Hanzo, who was being pulled in by gravity. Adsorption, what kind of technique is that? In an instant, Hanzo realized the effect of the technique. His pupils narrowed, and he looked at Payne, who was getting closer and closer. He flicked his wrist and swung out his Kusarigama. Click, click, click. The chains coiled like snakes around the doorpost behind him, forcibly stopping his uncontrollable movement. However, Payne's eyes darkened, and the gravitational pull on Hanzo suddenly increased, causing the doorpost to creak under the strain. Hanzo's body was also torn apart, and his bones cracked all over. No hand seals required, yet it's a bloodline limit. Is it the power of those eyes? Hanzo's mind raced. He decisively released his grip on the scythe, and his body was once again pulled by the powerful gravity, flying towards Payne at an even faster speed. The powerful suction force is irresistible, and it seems to have no time limit. "In that case," Hanzo said, gazing intently at Payne in the distance, he quickly formed hand seals, unleashing the water release, water cannon technique. He could feel that the speed at which he was refining chakra and the control he had over it were several times stronger than when he was at his peak. There is an even greater power hidden within this body, but there is no time for him to explore it now. Bang! He spat out a water cannon as heavy as lead, carrying enough force to pierce through iron walls, and blasted it towards Payne in front of him. These actions and judgments were all made within a mere 3 seconds, a testament to Hanzo's decades of experience and intuition honed in countless battles. However, looking at the powerful water cannon, Payne made no move, only gently pushing out his arm. Shinra Tensei. Hum! An unparalleled, terrifying, repulsive force erupted from the center of Payne. The air distorted amidst the piercing shriek, and the surrounding rain vanished in an instant, creating a brief vacuum. It was as if an invisible giant hammer was slamming down on Hanzo, who had nowhere to turn for leverage. Bang! The heavy water cannon that tore through the air was also violently reversed by the repulsive force. What? Hanzo's expression changed slightly. The forces of attraction and repulsion alternated abruptly, leaving him no time to react before he was slammed into his body by the combined force of the repulsion and the heavy impact of the water cannon. He crashed uncontrollably to the ground, while the human path appeared below like a ghost, its 5 fingers like hooks carrying a chilling aura that could devour souls. But just before he was about to touch Hanzo, the falling figure suddenly turned into a puddle of water. Water instantaneous body technique. Hanzo used this ninjutsu to evade Orochimaru's hidden shadow, snake hands, and Jiraiya's needle G's. He also used this ninjutsu to evade Nagato's chakra dragon attack, released by the Jido Mars. Ham. The next moment, Hanzo's figure appeared silently behind the other side of the Asura path, his Kusarigama already retrieved and held in his hand. With a sudden twist of his body, he swung the Kusarigama out. This strike was aimed at the head, truly like the Grim Reaper wielding a scythe, done completely silently. However, without turning his head, Shuradao seemed to see him in a blind spot, and a sharp serration pierced out from behind him with a crisp crack sound. Clang! Sparks flew as the saw teeth clashed with the sickle, and the piercing clang of metal echoed throughout the heavens and earth. Feeling the heavy force and realizing that he had been exposed for no reason, Hanzo's expression became somewhat serious. What exactly happened? How did this guy find me? But before Hanzo could figure out the reason. Click! Suddenly, the Asura path reached out and grabbed his hands. Another arm extended from his shoulder, transforming into a cold, menacing cannon barrel before his eyes, with blinding lasers rapidly condensing within it. Asura's attack. Hanzo felt a chill run down his spine and roared, Ikuri. Almost the instant the sound rang out, a huge tail slammed down with tremendous force. Snap bang. Shura Path expressionlessly crushed Hanzo's wrist, then his feet exploded with chakra as he retreated rapidly. His tail narrowly missed his eyes, smashing the ground beneath his feet and creating a net-like crack. Sucker punch. Pain raised his arm at Hanzo again, but just as he was about to use Bancho Tenin, the salamander suddenly turned around and swung its thick tail. Everything in its path was as fragile as a bubble, but when it reached the end of its sweep, it seemed to come to a halt as if it had hit a solid barrier. A powerful repulsive force slowly rose in front of the stopped tail, gradually stretching the thick, massive tail apart bit by bit. Pain stared at the terrifying salamander and said coldly, "Get lost." Boom! A loud explosion, several times stronger than a roar, rang out, and the repulsive force forcefully overwhelmed the power of the salamander. The massive body of the well slid backward for dozens of meters, its limbs carving deep furrows in the ground. Gazing at the enormous salamander, Pain, who had maintained a blank expression, frowned. Hanzo is known as a poisonous weapon on the battlefield, and 70% of the reason is because of the salamander named Ibuki. He hadn't expected that Hanzo would still have the ability to summon Ibuki. According to Zetsu's information, Hanzo should have been unable to exert his full strength as he got older. But, so what? Pain said coldly. All resistance is futile. Hanzo's figure appeared above the salamander's head. He looked at the four figures in the distance wearing black robes with red clouds, his brows furrowed as he endured the pain in his wrists. What a bizarre power. If I'm not mistaken, Yahiko's ability seems to be absorption and impact, and the bald man obviously has various weapons hidden inside his body. The abilities of the long-haired man and the woman are still unclear, but Hanzo's instincts tell him that the long-haired man is extremely dangerous. They were clearly people who had been dead for a long time. There were no signs of them using ninjutsu. Their eyes looked identical, and they were inexplicably discovered just now. Hanzo, working with Ibuse, continued to entangle Pain, constantly processing the information about the three people in front of him. Boom! Ibuki's attack was once again blocked by Shinra Tensei. Hanzo suddenly paused, noticing Pain's slowness. There is no limit to the number of attacks. Are there any restrictions on the intervals? Ibushi. With this in mind, Hanzo bent down without hesitation and pressed the diamond-shaped mark of his palm onto the salamander. The chakra accumulated within his body, surged towards the salamander. He already knew Pain's weakness. The attack interval is 5 to 6 seconds. No wonder this guy crippled my hand the first time, Hanzo thought with a chill. Unfortunately, Pain won't give him that chance. Call out, call out, call out, call out. Shurapath reached out and twisted his arm, unleashing several rockets trailing flames that blocked all of Hanzo's escape routes. Abushi! With his wrist crushed, Hanzo was unable to form hand seals. Seeing this, he sensed something was wrong and let out a low growl. The salamander under his feet raised its thick neck and took a deep breath. The heavy rain, as if swept by the wind, turned into a white tornado in the mouth of the salamander. The next moment, it suddenly opened its huge mouth towards the sky. Puff! A thick, impenetrable purplish-black poisonous mist erupted like a burst dam. This toxic fog not only covers a very wide area and moves extremely fast, but what's even more terrifying is that it spreads and settles in the rain, forming a deadly zone. The air was filled with a pungent, fishy stench, and the ground made a hissing sound as it corroded. Missiles facing the poisonous fog were corroded instantly and dissolved within seconds. The Asura path within the attack range also melted instantly, and the mechanical devices exposed inside its body began to dissolve. But at that moment, the human path appeared in front of the Deva path Pain, who raised his arm and aimed it at the back of the former. Boom! A powerful repulsive force acted behind the human path, tearing and blowing away the ground along with it. Human Dao was thrown into the poisonous fog like a cannonball, and his body began to corrode at a visible speed, but his hand was still able to touch the salamander's body. Soul extraction. The human path's Rinnegan gleamed with an eerie light as its right hand reached out and grabbed the belly of the salamander. Nagato focused most of his chakra on the human path, and the soul of the salamander was forcibly and gradually extracted from its body. This is the only Pain to whom Hanzo currently knows nothing about. What kind of technique is that? Upon seeing this, Hanzo's expression changed, but in the next moment, Pain's Rinnegan turned in the distance, and his outstretched hand made a grasping motion. All things guide the heavens. A powerful suction force suddenly acted on Hanzo, this time with full force, and almost instantly Hanzo was thrown out uncontrollably. At the same time, Hanzo's wrist cracked, and he was finally completely healed under the effect of the wedge. However, before he could raise his hand to form a hand seal. Boom! Asurapath's fist detached from his wrist and smashed out, slamming Hanzo, who had nowhere to grab hold of in midair, down. Human Path appeared below Hanzo and grabbed Hanzo's stiff body. Hanzo's pupils contracted instantly, as if his soul had been gripped by an invisible hand, and intense pain and weakness swept over his entire body in an instant. It's over. Pain, the Deva path, hovered in the air, looking down at Hanzo, whose soul had been stripped away by the human path. His calm voice was utterly unwavering. To challenge a god is inherently reckless. As soon as he finished speaking, Renjiandao, expressionless, suddenly clenched his 5 fingers. But at that moment, an incredibly powerful suppressive force surged forth, like a nail driving Hanzo's soul into place, instantly halting the soul's separation. Nagato, who controlled the human path, frowned and looked at the diamond-shaped mark on Hanzo's palm. This thing pinned Hanzo's soul down, preventing him from pulling Hanzo's soul out of his body. What is this? As Nagato pondered this, black lines extended from the mark, instantly covering his right side, and even his soul, which had been separated from his body, was covered by the black lines. Then it spread to the arm of the human realm that was grasping Hanzo's soul. Hum! Without any chance to react, Nagato, who was controlling the human path, felt a sudden darkness before his eyes, which was quickly stained with blood. He opened his eyes, and what he saw was chaos. Here it is. Nagato looked down at her arms and body and immediately realized that she had been forcibly pulled into the mental space. Her pupils contracted, and a look of surprise appeared on her face. Someone actually followed the path of humanity and dragged his original soul into the search. How could such a thing possibly be possible? As he was filled with surprise and doubt, a hoarse and indifferent voice came from the darkness amidst the deathly silence. "You lowly insect, is it you who touches my soul?" The owner of the voice seemed to have seen something, paused slightly, and seemed to have a hint of doubt in his tone. "Those are not the eyes you should have. Tell me, where did your eyes come from? Are these eyes I shouldn't have? What does that mean?" Upon hearing this, Nagato suddenly looked up into the distance, a chill running through his heart. As far as the eye could see, a huge, distorted, shadowy outline floated in the chaotic mist. But at the edge of the horizon, on a tall, jagged throne made of white bones, a figure sat indistinctly. Chapter 76, Author's Note. Chapter 74, Author's Note plus bonus chapter for first subscription. After a month and a half of new book release, this book is finally available for purchase. Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter 2025, Chinese letter 6, Chinese letter 13, Chinese letter 0, Chinese letter 0, Chinese letter. At 00 on Friday, October will be here waiting for everyone. Those who have money, please support us financially. Those who don't, please support us with your presence. There will be extra chapters based on the first subscription. First-time subscriptions are really important as they are closely related to future updates. Higher first-time subscription numbers will give me more motivation to update more frequently. First-time subscriptions only cost a few cents or $1, so please try your best to subscribe for me QAQ. I'm currently a senior in college, so the pressure of balancing my studies and writing is quite significant. After the book is published, I will maintain a steady output of 6,000 words per day while ensuring quality, and I will also add extra chapters. Next up is an extra chapter, so please bring it on. First subscription. Subscriptions made within 24 hours of the product's release. I currently have 3,000 paid subscribers, so let's take 2,000 initial subscriptions as an example. I guarantee at least 4 chapters will be updated on the day of release. More than 2,000 initial subscriptions, plus 1 chapters. More than 2,300 initial subscriptions, plus 2 chapters. More than 2,500 initial subscriptions, plus 3 chapters. More than 3,000 initial subscriptions, plus 4 chapters. If we can get more than 4,000 first subscriptions, I will add 10 more chapters. Donations. A single account can accumulate donations. 1 Hall Master, plus 3 chapters. 1 Sect Leader, plus 5 chapters. 1 Alliance Leader, plus 8 chapters. Silver Alliance and above. LOL, this only exists in dreams. If it really existed, I would add 20 more chapters and a cross-dressing scene. Are they? For every 1,000 monthly votes, 1 extra chapter will be added. If the number of monthly votes exceeds 1,000, 2 extra chapters will be added for every additional 1,000 votes. So please vote for me with your monthly tickets. 300-character voiceovers added, 1 extra chapter. The popularity index has increased by 1 level, so here's 1 more update. 1 qualified secondary setting will receive 1 extra chapter. If the character card gets over 3,000 likes, I'll add 1 more chapter. Obtained a character vest, 5,000 star points, 1 extra chapter added. P.S. These are just preliminary rules for bonus chapters. More may be added later. In short, let's encourage each other. PSS. Although we do compile statistics, there are bound to be some errors and omissions. You can remind us in October and feel free to comment if you have any suggestions for updates. In conclusion, I sincerely thank all the readers who have supported me. Without your monthly votes, continued reading, and comments, I wouldn't have made it this far in October. I will do my best to update more frequently while maintaining quality throughout October. I don't know if this book will continue to bring joy to everyone. All I can do in October is to write it well. Therefore, please give October more confidence and support, so that October has the confidence and courage to put aside other things and focus on writing the book. End of this chapter. Chapter 77. Stepping on ants without crushing them is a difficult task to master. It requires concide. Chapter 75. Stepping over ants without crushing them is a difficult task to master. 15 first subscription requests. The noisy, dense rain sounds from the outside world were shut out. Upon entering this space, an eerie silence descends upon it. It wasn't completely silent, but rather as if one were sinking into the depths of a thick, viscous liquid, where the passage of time became blurred and indistinct, filled with a more primal and indescribable atmosphere. What made Nagato feel most uneasy, and uneasy was the omnipresent sense of being watched. He could clearly feel that every inch of this space was filled with a cold, ancient, and extremely malicious will. The shadowy outlines in the mist resembled pupils, coldly watching him, the uninvited guest, but upon closer inspection, they were empty. "Who are you?" Nagato's questioning voice carried far into the distance, seemingly endless, as if the place were boundless. So he frowned, started walking, and chose a direction to go. As Nagato drew closer, he felt as if he were walking step by step into the sea from the beach, the heavy pressure gradually engulfing his chest, making him feel uneasy and suffocated. Just then, zig! A drop of blood fell to the ground beneath Nagato's feet, yet it seemed to ripple across the surface of water, the crimson color gradually staining his vision. He finally saw the sea of blood beneath his feet. Everything before him was filled with black and red. But amidst the black and red hues, countless pale skeletons piled up before Nagato's eyes, forming a mountain of corpses he gazed upon. On that jagged throne made of piled bones, a figure sat quietly, one hand casually resting on a pale skull, the other hand lazily propping up his chin. He didn't even open his eyes fully. His eyelids were half closed, and his thick eyelashes cast shadows in front of his eyes. "You!" Nagato looked up at the figure atop the mountain of corpses, and instinctively opened his mouth upon seeing the face. However, the person slightly raised their eyes and looked down at Nagato. I Silence, a deathly silence, yet more intimidating than any words. That gaze was more than just seeing. Nagato felt as if his soul and essence were being dissected and examined bit by that gaze, a feeling that filled his soul with fear and trembling. He hadn't felt this way in a long time, since he mastered these two Rinnegan. The last time was when Yahiko died in front of him, and he felt that utterly real weakness and powerlessness. At that moment, under that condescending gaze, Nagato experienced that feeling again, and he finally realized a fact. Within Hanzo's body lies something that must never be touched. Under that threat and unease that came from the depths of her soul, Nagato almost subconsciously averted her gaze and lowered her head, but she also felt a deep sense of humiliation and resentment. He is pain, he is God, yet he is so cowardly. Who exactly is this guy? The untouchable being in Nagato's eyes was naturally Hyuga Kumikawa, who resided deep within Hanzo's soul, and this scene did not surprise him. Even after being resurrected by Kabuto Yakashi using the impure world reincarnation technique, Nagato, whose mental state was almost completely worn down by the Jido Mazo and the Rinnegan, still looked sickly. Now that he's on his home turf, he's just fish on the chopping block. He is the master of everything here, the sole law of this space. Hinata Kumikawa shifted his gaze, as if he had seen a slightly novel antique. only to find it to be a poor quality item, leaving him speechless and bored. It doesn't matter whether you die or he dies. He lowered his eyes, his voice low and slow, with a hoarse metallic quality. For the sake of these eyes, I'll let you off this time, but there won't be a next time. Nagato snapped out of her shock, abruptly raising her head with a grim expression. She looked at the figure atop the mountain of corpses and said in a low voice, "Why are you looking at those eyes instead of me? These two Rinnegan are clearly his. He was born to be a god who would bring peace to the world, and he will nurture peace amidst suffering." However, almost the instant the words were spoken, Nagato suddenly saw the corner of that face twitch slightly upwards. That wasn't a laugh, but a very subtle, contemptuous annoyance. Snort. Just one syllable. It contains no real content, yet it is 1,000 times, 10,000 times more terrifying than any words. Hinata Kumakawa finally raised his eyes, his deep blue pupils swirling like eddies beneath a calm sea, taking away all of Nagato's courage. Hinata Kumakawa once again simulated and reproduced the full power of the Tenseigan. Looking down at him from those superior eyes, Nagato felt for the first time a sense of insignificance that came from the depths of his soul, a sense that felt incredibly unfamiliar and even strung his very soul. That wasn't the gaze of a human looking at another human, nor even the indifference he showed when he considered himself a god towards those mortals. It was more like he was looking at an object. Hinata Kumakawa's gaze was no longer scrutinizing, but rather fixed on something. Nagato felt that everything about him, his form, soul, thoughts, and even his very existence, had been completely seen through and nailed to the spot by that gaze. "Who do you think you are?" Hinata Kumakawa's voice was cold and deep, carrying a cruel and impatient understanding. "It's nothing more than a lowly vessel used to hold those eyes. Without these eyes that don't belong to you, you would be nothing more than a weak ant." As soon as he finished speaking, Hyuga Kumakawa raised his arm and extended his index finger, freezing Nagato's soul in place. The finger pointing at Nagato's face, then gently slid down. Puff! A silent, invisible stillness descended, and his right arm, like a disassembled building block, suddenly separated and broke off from his shoulder. But it's not over yet. Hinata Kumakawa made another light stroke. Puff! The left leg is separated from the torso. Several cracks appeared on Nagato's spirit body, his limbs and torso separated, yet strangely suspended in midair, making him look like a disassembled puppet. Some shimmering white particles drifted from the severed limbs. Ah! The pain originating from the very soul was terrifying. It felt as if everything, muscles, skin, bones, and even the brain, was being shredded, causing Nagato to let out a piercing scream. It seemed that because of the decadent music created by Nagato with wails and fear, the hoarse voice that entered Nagato's ears finally carried a hint of pleasure. "Cherish the rest of your life that you have earned so easily," he said softly. "It's hard to control the force you use to step on ants without crushing them. Remember, if you ever step into this place again, no matter whose pawn you are, I will crush you." As soon as the words were spoken, the entire space seemed to come alive, no longer the previous calm and deathly stillness. The shadows in the fog transformed into a fierce wind, and the sea of blood beneath their feet began to surge and undulate. Nagato's shattered soul was roughly kneaded by a force, and several invisible chains tightly bound him and pulled him out. End of this chapter. Chapter 78. White Zetsu has this kind of function. Chapter 76. White Zetsu has this kind of use. 25 first subscription requested. At this moment, only a few seconds have passed in reality. In Conan's eyes, Hanzo's soul had been mostly extracted and was about to become an empty shell. Victory seemed to be in Pain's grasp. However, at this moment, The heavenly path, the Asura path, and the human path suddenly froze. The process of extracting the soul from the human realm came to an abrupt halt, and the hand pressing on Hanzo's head twitched violently. Boom, boom. Before Zyro Nan could react, the three figures fell to the ground abruptly, like birds with broken wings. Pain. Zyro Nan, who had been silent all along, couldn't help but shrink her pupils upon seeing this. Without hesitation, he spread his paper wings, and countless sheets of paper flew out, covering the bodies of the heavenly Tao, the Asura Tao, and the human Tao. While Hanzo's spirit was still dazed after returning to his body, she grabbed the three figures and flew away from Aimgakure without looking back. At this moment, Conan knew better than anyone that Pain's sudden transformation must mean something had happened to Nagato's main body. Is it a blemish or just a spot? Sure enough, those two malicious guys were completely untrustworthy. Hanzo and Aimgakure were completely forgotten by Conan at this moment. She didn't believe that Hanzo could make Pain act this way. Her only thought was to get to Nagato's side immediately. Damn it! Hanzo was abruptly pulled back from the brink of his soul leaving his body, panting heavily, his eyes still filled with extreme fear and the astonishment of surviving a close call. He staggered to his feet, pressed his hand to his head, shook his head, and looked into the distance, his expression furious. You think you can just leave. But just as he was about to chase after them, a voice reached his ears. Don't rush. Hanzo looked up following the sound and saw Hyuga Kumakawa standing on the head of the salamander. He gazed at Conan spreading her wings in the distance, then looked down at Hanzo below and smiled. Let me tell you what they went through first. Then it's your turn to make a choice. Meanwhile, a dozen kilometers away from Aimgakure village, there is a cave blocked by rocks. If someone tries to touch the rock, they will find that the rock has a very strange feel. Conan's divine origami technique. The paper can transform and disguise itself as any object, so much so that even the Sharingan cannot detect it. At this moment, deep in the dark and damp cave, the emaciated Changmen, almost nothing but a skeleton, stood in a simple wooden structure, with countless black rods deeply embedded in his back. On the other side, white Zetsu Fei, whose entire body was covered in swirling patterns, sat cross-legged on the ground. Oh dear, Madara-sama only knows how to boss people around. What danger could Nagato possibly be in? It swayed back and forth like someone with ADHD, listlessly muttering to itself. Speaking of which, is a white Zetsu a plant or a human? If it's a plant, why can't it decompose its own feces? If it's a human, why can't it poop? Just as Afei's mind was wandering, thinking about all sorts of nonsensical, poop-related issues. Standing inside the cold device, Nagato opened his eyes, his deep Rinnegan eyes widening suddenly. An unprecedentedly intense mental shock surged through the black chakra rods connecting to the human realm. Like a flood bursting its banks, it suddenly poured into my soul. Ugh! A piercing scream echoed throughout the cave, causing Afei, who was standing nearby, to instinctively shiver and jump up to look at Nagato. The gaunt face was contorted in extreme pain, the withered body trembled uncontrollably with screams, and the head was raised as if the eyes were about to burst out of their sockets. Pain, pain that tears your soul apart. The sudden pain was so intense it was unimaginable. Nagato felt as if his brain was being stirred up by countless red-hot iron rods. Even as he struggled in agony, the device securing his body was torn off, and blood gushed from the wound instantly. What's going on? What's going on? Seeing this, Afei's face, devoid of features, revealed no expression, but its frantic scurrying around the gate showed just how panicked it was. Puff! A mouthful of scalding blood gushed from Changmanku, staining his withered body and the cold device beneath him. Ah-Fei ran around inside and outside the cave, but couldn't find any enemies. He was so anxious that he was like a headless fly or an ant on a hot pan. Damn it, this isn't telling me to be wary of the enemy, is it? Where are the enemies? Seeing Nagato's pale face turn deathly white, it jumped up and down in anger, yelling, "If anything happens to Nagato, Lord Madara will definitely feed me to the wild dogs and turn me into poop." With this in mind, it disregarded everything else and jumped directly onto Nagato's device. Its swirling body unfolded like a blooming epiphyllum, enveloping the constantly bleeding Nagato within it. It was at this moment that Conan appeared in the cave, immediately smelled the blood, and saw Nagato enveloped in white zetsu. "Damn it, what are you doing?" Conan instantly confirmed her suspicions, but fearing she might accidentally injure Nagato, she dared not use ninjutsu to attack. She could only roar and charge forward in extreme anger. But when she tried to pull a fei off Nagato, her outstretched hand was suddenly grabbed by the wrist, and then she heard Nagato's suppressed pain. "Calm down, Conan. This white zetsu is helping me." "What?" Upon hearing this, Conan was stunned for a moment. She forcibly suppressed her shock and anger and looked carefully. Only then did she realize that Nagato's painful breathing and trembling body had actually gradually stopped. At this moment, Nagato could feel a powerful life force suppressing his injuries and reducing the pain in his soul. Not only that, his body was like a parched land receiving sweet rain, and the long-lost vitality gradually filled his withered body, and even his two Rinnegan eyes became much more docile. White Zetsu can actually have this effect. Instead of feeling joy, Nagato felt a chill run down his spine. Seemingly sensing his change in mood, Ah-Fei unfolded the garment covering him again, revealing his emaciated body once more. "Haha, it's finally over." Ah-Fei leaped out, scratching his head and saying innocently, "Lord Nagato, I'm so glad you're all right. Otherwise, Lord Madara would have fed me to the wild dogs and turned me into poop." Nagato didn't say anything or try to stop it, but just gave it a cold look. Because he was still unsure whether the white Zetsu could turn the tables and interfere with him, and his battle with Hanzo of Aimgakure was not yet completely over. Snap, snap. The steady, undisguised footsteps reached her ears, and the dazed Conan immediately focused her pupils on Nagato, warily looking towards the dark, deep entrance passage of the cave. Hanzo and Hinata Yunkawa emerged from the shadows, their gazes instantly locking onto the gaunt figure standing inside the strange device in the center of the cave. End of this chapter. Chapter 79, Yes, I'm Here to Die. Chapter 77, Yes, I'm Here to Die, 35 first subscriptions requested. Nagato, is pain's true form really you? Hanzo's complex gaze swept over Nagato, and the anger he felt from nearly dying vanished completely at that moment. At first glance, Nagato doesn't even look like a living person. He looks more like a skeleton forgotten in a dark corner, weathered over 1,000 years. His body had become so emaciated that it was horrifying. His lifeless, pale skin clung tightly to his jagged bones, as if some invisible force had drained all his flesh and blood. His ribs were clearly defined and protruded, his collarbone was deeply sunken, as if carved by a knife, and his arms were as thin as withered branches in winter, as if they would break at the slightest touch. Even his legs were crippled by Hanzo's explosive tag trap, and he had basically lost the ability to walk. He could only move by being confined in that simple device. Her dry, red hair hung loose like withered vines, making her face look like a skull covered with a thin membrane, and her eye sockets beneath the red hair were sunken into two dark holes. However, deep within those eye sockets were a pair of immortal eyes, shimmering with an eerie light in the dim light. Rinnegan. These legendary eyes of the immortals are embedded in this withered body, as if the power of a god has been forcibly stuffed into a container on the verge of collapse. Hanzo, you finally come, but... Nagato's Rinnegan slowly turned to look at the figure beside Hanzo, but even with those eyes, he couldn't see through the face hidden in the shadows. However, Nagato sensed a familiar aura emanating from the other person. The pain deep in his soul had not yet dissipated, and the fear was still vivid in his memory, causing his body to tremble slightly, involuntarily. "Hello, Mr. Nagato." Hinata Kumikawa stepped forward, his tone humble yet smiling. "You may call me Kay. I suppose you have already met my lord. Please allow me to convey my lord's apologies to you." Upon hearing this, Hanzo subconsciously looked at his palm, and Conan was also stunned for a moment, but quickly reacted, her face showing anger. "So it was you. Since it wasn't Madara and Zetsu who caused Nagato's suffering, it could only be Hanzo and the person in front of him." "No, no, Miss Conan, it is my master, not me." Hinata Kumikawa's tone remained gentle as he calmly corrected Conan's statement. "Who is that person?" Nagato suddenly asked. "It is my lord," Hinata Kumikawa said with a smile. "I..." Nagato felt his head start to throb again, but knowing the guy clearly didn't want to talk, he simply said coldly, "So you're here to die." As he spoke, the ripples in his pupils slowly spread out, and a powerful aura emanated from his body once again. He was prepared to fight to the death, and hatred also surfaced in Zyro Nan's eyes. But at that moment, Hanzo suddenly nodded and said briefly and forcefully, "Yes." I... Nagato's chakra seemed to pause for a moment, but he quickly realized that Hanzo was responding to the sarcasm he had just casually uttered. "I'm here to die." Hanzo's voice was deep and clear as he pointed the scythe in his hand at his heart, confirming Nagato's guess. Looking at Hanzo at this moment, Hyuga Kumikawa inexplicably saw a scene from the original story where Hashirama Senju, in order to avenge Tobarama's death at Izuna's hands, stabbed himself with a kunai in front of Madara Uchiha. He couldn't help but smile to himself. How much of the former Hashirama, now Hanzo, is real, and how much is fake? Hinata Kumikawa didn't know, Nagato and the other two didn't know, and perhaps even Hanzo himself didn't know. Hinata Kumikawa had already told Hanzo what those eyes meant, and also told him about Nagato's plan to create tailed beast weapons to bring peace through fear. Hanzo knew better than anyone the limits of an ordinary ninja. On his way here, he saw so many things that he had previously overlooked. He looked towards the town and saw that the once prosperous and bustling stone houses, teeming with craftsmen, were now dilapidated and in ruins. He looked towards the riverbank and saw that the place that had once been full of life and joy had been completely submerged by the river that brought prosperity. He saw that the once bustling port, which used to handle ships, was now a ruin ravaged by war, and that the few remaining wheat fields had fallen to the ground. He was even recognized by some civilians, but they told him that the civilians he had saved had starved to death on the roadside 3 years ago. Yes, they didn't die in the war, but starved to death. Hanzo dared not stop, and could only keep walking and walking, almost in a desperate escape, until he entered the cave and saw those eyes. The eye of God that controls life and death. Hanzo knew that the current state of the land of rain was already the limit of what he could do. However, Nagato, who possesses those eyes, has more possibilities and can do more things. So he wanted to give it a try. "I already know everything from Shadow." Hanzo did not attempt to defend himself against his mistakes. He met the gaze of those Rinnegan eyes and said, word by word, "It was my mistake to collude with Danzo to kill Yahiko, and it was also my order to eliminate the Akatsuki organization." He admitted it so thoroughly, so calmly, without any embellishment or excuses. Immediately, Hanzo paused, as if remembering something, and gave a self-deprecating laugh. "I once encountered a samurai who, while all his companions fled for their lives, knew he was no match for me, yet still drew his sword and charged at me. I defeated him, but his spirit of facing death moved me, so I told him that a person's end is not death, but when he loses his faith. I said I would declare him a hero to the world. But ironically, faced with fading vitality, vanishing power, ever-present threats, and the fear of death, I succumbed. In the daily grind, one becomes weak and cowardly, losing one's former beliefs and ideals, turning into the coward one hates and despises the most. The samurai Hanzo mentioned was none other than Mifune, the current general of the Land of Iron, who was once a young man. Therefore, Hanzo did not actually kill Mifune in the end. Instead, out of courage and appreciation, he spared Mifune. At that time, Hanzo truly deserved the title of a strongman. There was no need to tell Nagato these things. Hanzo didn't want Nagato to mistakenly believe that he wanted Nagato to forgive him as he had once forgiven Mifune. A mistake is a mistake. He is now the same Hanzo he once was, and he doesn't need excuses. He can face the fear of death with equanimity. I am not saying this to ask for your forgiveness. I understand that all your pain is caused by my own hands. Hanzo's tone and expression were utterly calm. After I die, you may leave my body to rot in the wilderness, or erase my reputation and let my name be spurned by countless people. It doesn't matter. Do whatever you want, as long as it makes sense to you. I have only one request. Looking at the still silent Nagato and the absent-minded Conan, he slowly lowered his tall figure. I have handed over my will to a trustworthy person, and you can rightfully take over Aimgakure. Hanzo said softly, after my death, please lead Aimgakure and this suffering nation toward the future that Yahiko once described to you. I can no longer do it, but you, with those eyes, can definitely do it. Yes, the reason for my current attitude may be partly due to the mistakes I made in the past, but more so for the country I care about. Time seemed to stand still, plunging into a deathly silence. Looking at Hanzo, who had almost humbled himself to the point of being buried in the earth, the ripples in Nagato Rin's eyes froze. He had envisioned countless ways Hanzo would react when faced with the reckoning. Stubborn resistance, sophistry, denial, begging for forgiveness, utterly despicable. However, he never expected to see this scene unfold before his eyes. This was not the Hanzo he knew at any time, not the proud and powerful Hanzo of the past, who would not have bowed down, nor the old and cowardly Hanzo of the past, who would not have faced death. At this moment, Hanzo is simply an old man who is willing to pay the price for his past mistakes and face death with equanimity. Conan stared intently at Hanzo, her eyes bloodshot, as she recalled that stormy night once again. He recalled Yahiko's resolute lunge at Nagato's raised kunai, and also the faint sound of the kunai tearing at his heart. Thinking back to the terror and collapse I felt then, to that heart-wrenching, desperate scream to Nagato now, consumed by hatred. What's this? Conan's trembling voice broke the deathly silence, her heart filled with indescribable bewilderment. Looking at Hanzo, she said in a nearly hoarse voice, "Then go die." As soon as he finished speaking, Hanzo moved. His movements were swift, with a calm and relieved air. He gripped the Kusarigama in his hand, a weapon that represented his former power and pride, a murder weapon that had claimed countless lives. At that moment, he poured all his strength into his own hand and stabbed himself in the chest in an almost embracing manner. Parfait. End of this chapter. Chapter 80, Idealists and Realists. Chapter 78, Idealists and Realists. 45 subscriptions requested. Parfait. A faint but clear sound, like tearing fabric, rang out. Crimson blood, warm with life, gushed out, flowing slowly down the cold, black scythe, dripping onto the soil and spreading out in a dark red pattern. Snap, snap. One drop, and another. The scarlet blood did not spurt violently, but rather slowly and silently seeped from his heart, soaking through the fabric that stained his chest. Why? Hanzo's hand holding the scythe trembled, but not from fear. All his strength and will were poured into this movement, and the tip of the blade had already penetrated his chest. However, it was impossible to continue stabbing. Nagato raised his hand at him without him noticing, and Wangxiang Tianyin grabbed his arm. The person who wants to die is trying to continue stabbing himself in the heart, but the person who should want him dead the most is stopping him. Hinata Kumikawa silently watched this scene, only glancing at Tobai hiding in the corner out of the corner of his eye, before shifting his position slightly. Do you want to do it yourself? Hanzo raised his head to meet those cold eyes, gripping the black scythe handle tightly, and said in a deep voice, "Your enemy is right before you. Don't you want revenge?" Conan stood frozen in place, her face, which had been cold with hatred, frozen in place. She stared intently at the scythe that Hanzo had pierced through his own chest, watching the crescent-shaped blade gradually become stained with glaring blood. "I still can't forgive you." Nagato's voice was like the grinding of rusty gears, and a tiny crack appeared in the transcendent and indifferent aura of a god that had been frozen in his twin Rinnegan eyes. Beneath the crevice lies blazing magma, an anger and denial that almost burns away all reason, emotions belonging to humankind. If I could, I would kill you with my own hands right now. The thought makes my body tremble, and I can't stop. Nagato's suppressed voice seemed to be squeezed out from between his clenched teeth. Then why haven't you made a move yet? Hanzo's expression was equally grim as he questioned. Don't tell me you still believe in Yahiko's naive fantasy that mutual understanding can bring peace. I willingly entrust my life and Aimgakure to you, because I know you will bring peace to other countries by stealing tailed beasts and developing forbidden techniques, thus instilling fear in them. In Hanzo's view, Nagato's plan was a realistic and feasible path, and even Hyuga Kumikawa, who was standing by, thought so. Both Yahiko and Jiraiya are idealists who feel guilty about hurting others and hope that people can understand each other and naturally eliminate conflicts. Both of them have great dreams but lack the power to achieve them. The former has died in his naive fantasy, and the latter understands that he is powerless and can only place his hopes on the elusive prophetic child. Hashirama Senju was somewhere between an idealist and a realist. He hoped that everyone would understand each other, but he didn't expect that everyone could do it. He believed that each generation should do its own thing, so he used overwhelming power to end the chaos and establish a new order for future generations. Although his descendants were not as promising as he had hoped, and continued to wage wars after his death, it was still better than the Warring States period, when almost all children had to go to war at the age of 5 or 6, with an average age of less than 30. Of course, this applies to large countries, but small countries that became victims suffered even more than during the Warring States period. When those 5 war machines collided, only the small country caught in the middle was crushed, and its flesh and blood pulverized. Naruto, with idealistic thoughts but realistic actions, believed that mutual understanding and forgiveness between people could end the endless hatred between countries. However, he knelt on the ground and begged the fourth Raikage not to execute Sasuke, who had kidnapped Killer Bee. He spoke arrogantly in a pleading tone, saying that he did not want Kumigakure and Konoha to fight each other because of Sasuke. In the end, he was speechless when the fourth Raikage retorted, "It's not too late for you to forgive me after I kill Sasuke." Later, peace was only achieved through overwhelming power, but the world remained unchanged, and the ninja world would repeat the same mistakes after Naruto's death. Having witnessed countless wars and deaths, Hanzo naturally understood this. He and later Sasuke Uchiha were both realists. They were rationally aware that the ninja world, after several wars, was filled with hatred, and that it was impossible for people to understand and forgive each other. Therefore, They directly used overwhelming power to end the conflict, establish a new order, and rule the entire ninja world. This is not the end, but a new beginning. If you can create the so-called tailed beast weapons and gain the power to instantly destroy a country, you can make those war-craving fools hesitate to act out of fear. Hanzo said in a deep voice, although this cannot bring true peace, as long as such peace can be maintained for generations, and those who harbored hatred because of the war die, there is hope to establish a new peaceful order and change the status quo. Even if a new peaceful order cannot be established, at least several decades of peace can be achieved. That's enough. Even the once incredibly powerful Hashirama Senju, due to his naive underestimation of human desires, could only maintain peace for 20 years. If Nagato could achieve decades of peace, Hanzo would be willing to die and hand over Aimgakure to Nagato. But tell me, Hanzo demanded, staring intently at Nagato. What are you hesitating about? Tell me first. Nagato's voice turned an even more terrifying hoarseness. Have you ever regretted it? I. Upon hearing this, Hanzo seemed to pause for a moment, subconsciously pursing his chapped lips. After killing Yahiko and the Akatsuki, he would naturally feel remorse whenever he saw Aimgakure with no successors. He would also wonder if Aimgakure would still have any hope of peace after his death if he had not killed Yahiko, but instead taken him in and taught him. He did have many choices at the time, but under Danzo's temptation and fear of death, he chose the worst option. Hanzo understood this in his heart, but he wouldn't say it. He only wanted Nagato to completely abandon his illusions about a great power. No regrets. His gaze passed over the distorted air before him, landing on Nagato's inhuman eyes. Undeterred by the terrifying power, he coldly said, I can tell you, even if I had to choose again right now, I would still kill Yahiko and all of you. Because the Akatsuki organization, clinging to naive fantasies, will only drag the land of rain into the abyss. Yahiko's so-called negotiations will not gain the understanding and peace of any major power. The Hidden Rain village, having lost its fighting spirit and showing a weak posture, will only become a pig and a dog to be slaughtered by major powers. The reason I am here is simply because I believe that you, with those eyes, can lead Aimgakure to a new future and bring peace to the land of rain. That's all. Zyro Nan's tightly clenched fists began to tremble again, but she felt a strange sense of powerlessness and despair. Because she knew Hanzo was right. That innocent girl died on that rainy night. You deserve to die. Nagato's tone was no longer angry, but had returned to its familiar indifference, and a chilling power surged forth from his eyes. Zyro Nan's throat bobbed, as if she wanted to utter a single syllable, but only a suffocating amount of air escaped. However, what came next was not the sound of a blade piercing flesh. Clang. End of this chapter.